I was 24 when my parents told me to pack my things and leave. You're just wasting space here, Ethan, my father said, his tone cold and final, like he'd been rehearsing that line for weeks. My mother didn't look at me, just stirred her coffee and mumbled something about how I needed to learn responsibility. The irony didn't even sting anymore. Not when my older sister, Madison, was sitting right there at the kitchen table, smiling like she'd just won a Lifetime Achievement Award. And in a way, she had, because they'd just given her $1 million to start her dream business. $1 million. In cash, transferred straight from Dad's account to hers. He even printed out the confirmation page like it was a trophy. "We believe in you, Maddie," he said, beaming. "This will finally put the family name on the map." She giggled, flipped her hair, and kissed his cheek like the golden child she'd always been. Meanwhile, I stood by the door with my half-packed duffel bag, the air thick with the smell of fresh espresso and favoritism. I'd seen it coming for years. Madison was the golden child, the prodigy, the princess who could do no wrong. I was the quiet one, the drifter, the one who didn't know what he wanted in life. She flunked out of college twice before deciding she was an entrepreneur, and somehow that made her visionary. I dropped out once to help pay the mortgage when Dad lost his job, and that made me lazy. She crashed 2 cars before age 22, and each time Dad bought her another one. I worked part-time delivering groceries and saved enough to buy a beat-up Honda Civic. And still, my mom asked if I really thought this was a smart investment. So when the $1 million announcement happened, I wasn't even angry, just tired. I'd spent years trying to earn approval that never came, years listening to them brag about Madison's latest venture while asking me to keep it down whenever I tried to talk about something I was proud of. "What about me?" I asked quietly that morning. "Am I supposed to just leave?" My father didn't even blink. "You're 24. Time to be a man. Madison's taking real risks for her future. What are you doing?" "Working," I said. "Saving." He laughed, short and sharp. "Saving what? Pennies? You don't build a life on scraps, son." My mom added, "You could learn something from your sister. She's not afraid to dream big." I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. Because what was the point? Every time I tried to explain myself in the past, it turned into another lecture about attitude or gratitude. So I just zipped my bag and nodded. "All right," I said. "Guess I'll figure it out." I left that day with $362 in my bank account, an old Civic that coughed every time I hit second gear, and no idea what I was supposed to do next. But I also left with something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. No more pretending. No more begging for scraps of respect. Just me, the road, and the open question of who I could be when I wasn't being told I was a disappointment. The first few nights were rough. I slept in the car by the beach because it was free and quiet. The sound of the waves helped me think. I showered at a gym that offered a 7-day trial and lived off dollar menu sandwiches. But even in those moments, I felt oddly free. Every day, I worked night shifts loading trucks at a distribution warehouse, and every morning, I sat in my car, watching the sunrise while sketching out ideas in a notebook. I'd always been good with computers. When I was a kid, I used to fix old laptops for neighbors and build simple websites for local shops. It was just a hobby, but now it felt like something I could build on. I started freelancing online, taking whatever tech gigs I could find, fixing code, designing basic landing pages, setting up e-commerce stores. It didn't pay much at first, but slowly, I built a small client base. Meanwhile, Madison's business was everywhere. She opened a luxury lifestyle boutique downtown. It was the kind of store that sold $200 candles and called them art. My parents visited weekly, bragging to their friends about how our daughter is a CEO now. She even did a local news interview, talking about female empowerment through fragrance. I watched the segment from the break room one night while eating a microwave burrito. My coworker Tony glanced at the TV, then at me. "Hey, that your sister?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "She's got that millionaire smile, huh?" he joked. "Yeah," I said again, but softer this time. I wasn't jealous. At least, that's what I told myself. But there were nights when I lay in the back seat of my car, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe they were right about me. Maybe I was the disappointment. Maybe some people were just born to have it all handed to them, while others had to claw their way through life. But then I'd remember the way my dad's voice had cracked when he said, "You're wasting space," and something inside me hardened. If they thought I was a waste of space, I'd build something so big it would make them choke on those words. So I doubled down. I saved every penny I could, taught myself new skills, and started building something real, a software platform for small businesses to manage their inventory. It started as a side project, but soon, a few of my clients wanted to try it. Then they told others. Within a year, I had 20 paying users, then 50, then 100. I wasn't rich, not even close, but it was the first time I felt like I was actually going somewhere. During that time, Madison's store got fancier. She hired influencers, hosted champagne nights, and posted motivational quotes about hustle while wearing designer heels. Mom sent me every article, every photo, every new milestone. "You should be proud of your sister," she'd say over text. "She's really doing it." I never replied. Then one night, after a particularly long shift, I got a voicemail from Dad. "Ethan," he said, "we heard you've been doing some kind of tech thing? That's nice, son. But listen, Madison's expanding. She needs help setting up her website. Why don't you give her a hand? It'd be good practice for you, and family should help family." I remember staring at my phone for a long time, the sound of traffic humming outside my window. Help her. The same sister who hadn't even asked how I was doing in years. The same parents who tossed me out like I was a burden. I didn't call back. But that was the night I knew something had shifted. I wasn't the same broke kid sleeping in his car anymore. I had something they didn't even see coming: momentum. A few months later, my platform landed a major client, an independent retailer chain that signed a six-figure contract. I quit the warehouse job, rented a small apartment, and officially registered my company. For the first time, I had an office, a business bank account, and a reason to wake up every morning. But that's also when the calls started coming again, from my parents, from Madison, from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. At first, it was casual. "How have you been? We should catch up." But beneath the politeness, I could hear something else: curiosity, maybe even a little fear. And then, one afternoon, my mom called out of the blue. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "Madison's been having a tough time lately. Sales are slowing down. Maybe you could, help her out? You're doing well now, aren't you?" That was the first crack in the golden image they'd built around her. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, the universe was finally balancing the scales. But I didn't know yet how bad it was going to get, how fast everything she'd built would start to crumble, or how far my parents would go to drag me back into their mess. And I definitely didn't know that, in the end, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about control, pride, and the one thing my family never thought I'd have: power. That moment was still ahead of me. I just didn't see it coming yet. It started slowly, the way tension always does in families like mine. Little comments slipped into phone calls, old patterns sneaking back in through polite voices. For months, I'd been trying to keep my distance, focusing on growing my software company, but somehow, my family always found a way to pull me back in. My mother called one Sunday afternoon, right as I was preparing a pitch for an investor. "Ethan, sweetheart," she said, her tone sugary but sharp underneath, "your sister's boutique has been struggling a bit lately. You know how the economy is." I didn't respond right away. "She just needs a bit of guidance, that's all," Mom continued. "You're so good with business now. Maybe you could look at her website, fix it up a little. Your family, after all." Family. That word again. It had become their favorite weapon. "I'm a bit busy right now, Mom," I said carefully. "Maybe she should hire a developer." There was a pause, then the sigh I knew too well. "Ethan, don't be difficult. She's your sister. You know she supported you when no one else did." That one made me laugh, quietly, bitterly. Supported me? She hadn't even called me after I left home. "Mom, I don't think helping with her boutique is." But she interrupted. "Don't be selfish, Ethan. You owe this family after all we've done for you." I just hung up. For years, I'd been the one expected to apologize, to make peace, to accept that I was always less than. Not anymore. A few days later, Madison herself called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. "Ethan," she said brightly, as if we were best friends. "Oh my God, it's been forever." "Yeah," I said flatly. "So," she continued, "Mom probably told you. I've been going through a little business hiccup. Nothing serious, just some cash flow stuff. But I figured since you're in the business world now," she emphasized it like it was some kind of novelty, "maybe you could help me out." I didn't say anything, so she went on. "I was thinking maybe you could invest. Like, a small partnership? just to get us through this season. It'd be good PR for you too. I laughed out loud. You want me to invest in your candle shop? Her tone immediately sharpened. It's not a candle shop, Ethan. It's a luxury lifestyle brand. And yes, I thought you'd want to help your sister instead of laughing at her. I didn't laugh at you, I said. I laughed at the idea that you think I'd fund the same people who kicked me out. There was a pause, heavy loaded. So that's how it is, she said coldly. You're still holding a grudge. I'm not holding anything, I said. I just learned. She hung up without another word. 2 days later, my parents showed up at my office unannounced. I was in the middle of a meeting when the receptionist knocked and whispered, "There's an older couple here. Says they're your parents." My stomach dropped. When I stepped into the hallway, there they were. My dad in his usual press shirt and my mom clutching her purse like it held the moral high ground. "Ethan," Dad said, his voice low but firm. "You need to stop acting like a stranger." I blinked. "You threw me out." He waved a hand. "You needed to learn responsibility. And look, it worked. You've done well. You should thank us." That line nearly made me choke. Thank them for making me sleep in my car? For years of humiliation? Before I could answer, Mom chimed in. "We're not here to argue, honey. We just want you to do the right thing. Madison's worked so hard, and she's been under so much stress. You're successful now. You can afford to help her." "And by help, you mean?" Dad crossed his arms. "A loan. Or an investment. You could save her business." I stared at them both. "You gave her $1 million, remember?" "That was years ago," Mom said. "Businesses take time to grow. And mine didn't get a single cent," I said. "But I'm the one who's supposed to bail her out?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Don't twist this. You wouldn't even have that business if we hadn't pushed you out of the house." There it was, the classic rewrite of history. Somehow, their cruelty had become tough love. "I think we're done here," I said quietly, turning toward my office door. Mom called after me. "You'll regret this, Ethan. Family should stand together." But they left before I could reply. For a few weeks, I didn't hear from them. I buried myself in work, building partnerships, hiring 2 developers, and expanding into new markets. But the silence didn't last. It never did. It started with small things. A few relatives checking in, asking how I was, then steering the conversation toward Madison's rough patch. An aunt sent me a long message about how family fortunes rise and fall together. A cousin tagged me in one of Madison's desperate Instagram posts. Support small businesses. Then came the family gathering. My parents insisted I attend my dad's birthday dinner. "It'll mean a lot to him," Mom said over the phone. "And Madison will be there too. We all need to reconnect." Every instinct told me to skip it, but something in me wanted to face them. Maybe I wanted to see if anything had changed. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't need their approval anymore. The restaurant was one of those expensive places my parents loved. White tablecloths, gold-rimmed plates, and waiters who spoke in whispers. When I walked in, the conversation paused. Madison was already there, in a designer dress, her hair perfectly styled. She smiled like a celebrity greeting a fan. "Ethan," she said, standing to hug me. "Look at you. You actually clean up nice." "Thanks," I said, taking my seat. Dad raised a glass. "To family," he said, "and to Madison, who's been working tirelessly to rebuild after some setbacks." The table clapped. I didn't. Madison smirked. "It's been a tough year, but you know me, I never give up. Some people would quit, but I'm not like that." She glanced at me as she said it. I said nothing, just sipped my water. Then Dad turned to me. "So, Ethan, how's the little tech thing going?" "Little tech thing. It's going well," I said evenly. "We're expanding into Europe next quarter." Mom smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's wonderful, dear. You should help your sister with some of that expansion experience. Maybe even." "Mom," I interrupted. "Let's not." The table went quiet. Madison tilted her head. "Wow, someone's touchy. I was just saying it'd be nice to work together, you know? Combine brains and beauty." Dad chuckled. "She's got a point. You're both talented in your own ways." "Yeah," I said. "Except one of us built something from scratch, and the other got $1 million head start." The air went ice cold. Madison's smile froze. "Ethan," Mom whispered sharply, "that's uncalled for." "No," I said, my voice calm. "What's uncalled for is pretending none of this ever happened." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. This is supposed to be a celebration." Madison leaned back, smirking again. "It's fine, Dad. Some people just can't handle watching others succeed." I laughed under my breath. Right? That must be it. Dinner ended early. On the way out, Mom grabbed my arm. You embarrassed us tonight, she hissed. You think your money makes you better than this family? I looked her straight in the eye. No, Mom. You made it clear years ago I wasn't part of this family. She let go without another word. Over the next few months, things escalated. Madison's boutique began posting discount sales every week. Then she deleted the comments section on her posts. Eventually, I started hearing rumors from clients, from mutual acquaintances, that she owed vendors tens of thousands. And then my parents started calling again, every day, first with guilt, then with anger. You're letting your sister fail, Dad said in one voicemail. We raised you better than this. It would have been almost funny if it didn't sting so much. After everything they'd done, after years of being invisible, they still thought I owed them. The last straw came one afternoon when I got home from work and found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mom. Ethan, we know you're doing well, and we're proud of you. But Madison is drowning. We've already mortgaged part of the house to help her, but it's not enough. Please, if you have any decency left, save your sister's dream. She's your blood. There was a check request enclosed. For $250,000. I sat on the couch for a long time, the letter in my hands, my mind racing through every memory, every insult, every you're not enough, every dinner where they toasted her and ignored me. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt calm, detached, like something inside me had finally clicked into place. They wanted to play games with guilt and manipulation? Fine, I'd play too. But this time, I wouldn't be the quiet one sitting at the table pretending not to notice the knives pointed my way. This time, I'd make sure they finally saw who they were dealing with. The unraveling began quietly, like a slow leak that no one notices until the floor gives way. For weeks, I tried to ignore the signs. Late-night messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, vague, urgent calls from my parents, and a growing sense that something was moving behind the scenes. But I didn't want to care. I was busy. My company had just closed another major partnership. I'd hired new staff. And for once, life actually felt stable. Then, one morning, I got an alert from my bank. A large transfer, $50,000, had been flagged for review. My stomach dropped. I hadn't made any transfer that week. I logged in immediately and froze. There it was, a pending transaction from one of my business accounts, routed to an unfamiliar entity under my sister's name. I called the bank. That transfer wasn't authorized, I said quickly. I didn't make it. The rep put me on hold, then returned with a confused tone. Sir, the request came through a joint authorization. Someone logged in using a linked account with matching family credentials. Family credentials? Yes, sir. The system shows that the request was made by an account connected to your parents' banking profile. My chest tightened. That couldn't be right. I hadn't linked any accounts with my family since I left home, years ago. But then it hit me. When I was younger, my father had insisted on helping me manage my savings. He'd opened a family joint account and said it was for emergencies. I'd forgotten about it, never used it again after leaving. But apparently, he hadn't. I immediately froze the transaction and changed every password I could think of. When I checked my emails, there were multiple failed login attempts from unknown devices. My dad's old email was listed on one of the recovery contacts. My hands were shaking. I called him straight away. He picked up on the third ring, his voice calm. Ethan, you don't have to be so dramatic. What did you do? I demanded. Why is there a transfer from my account to Madison's name? He sighed. We needed to move some money temporarily. Madison's business was about to lose its lease. We'll pay it back. I almost laughed. You took money from my company without asking. Don't exaggerate, he snapped. It's all in the family. We've helped you enough over the years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You kicked me out, Dad. That was for your own good, he said, his tone sharp now. You're successful because we pushed you. So you owe this family some gratitude. It's time you give back. I was silent for a long time. Then I said quietly, you didn't give me anything. You gave her everything. Don't talk about your sister that way, he barked. She's trying. She's had a hard year. So you stole from me? I borrowed it, he said quickly. You can't even feel it missing. You're making good money now. Don't act like it's some tragedy. My blood boiled. You could have asked. He laughed. If I asked, you'd have said no. He hung up before I could answer. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not anger this time, but something deeper. A quiet, irreversible shift. I'd always known my parents favored Madison, but I hadn't realized how far they'd go for her. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was betrayal. I sat at my desk for nearly an hour, staring at the frozen transfer. The betrayal wasn't about the money. It was about the entitlement, the way they saw my success as theirs. The way they thought they could still reach into my life and take whatever they wanted, just because I shared their last name. That evening, I drove to their house, the same one I'd been thrown out of 5 years earlier. The drive felt longer than I remembered. When I pulled up, Madison's brand new SUV was parked in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Ethan," she said sweetly, like nothing had happened. "You look tired. Work too hard, don't you?" I didn't respond. "Where's Dad?" She hesitated. "In the living room." "But can't we just—" "I'm not here to chat, Mom." Her smile faltered, and I walked past her into the house. Dad was watching TV, Madison sitting on the couch beside him, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she smirked. Well, the prodigal son returns." "Did you do it?" I asked. She blinked. "Do what?" "Authorize a transfer from my company account." Her smirk vanished. She glanced at Dad, then back at me. "Relax, it was just temporary." I stared at her. "You did do it." She rolled her eyes. "Dad said it'd be fine. I needed it to cover payroll for a month." "You make 6 figures a year. What's 50 grand to you?" I couldn't speak for a second. The audacity was staggering. That money wasn't just mine. It was my employees', my company's. "Oh please," she scoffed. "You think your little startup's some empire? You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for Dad's connections." I turned to my father. "You gave her access to my account?" He didn't even look guilty. "It's all in the family, Ethan. Stop being selfish. You wouldn't even notice it missing." "I already froze the account," I said quietly. "And I filed a fraud report." The room went silent. Mom gasped. "You what?" "I filed a fraud report," I repeated. "It's already under review." Dad stood up, his face red. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That could ruin your sister's business." "Good," I said. "Maybe it's time she learned what consequences feel like." Mom's voice cracked. "Ethan, please. You're going to tear this family apart." I laughed bitterly. "You already did." I turned to leave, but Madison stood up suddenly, her face twisted with rage. "You think you're so perfect now? You think that stupid little app makes you better than us?" "No," I said calmly. "I think it proves you don't need $1 million handout to build something real." She grabbed a glass from the coffee table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall near me. My mother screamed. My father shouted her name. But I just stood there, unmoving. "That's the difference between us, Maddie," I said quietly. "You destroy things when you don't get your way." I built. Then I walked out. That night, I stayed awake in my apartment, watching the city lights flicker below. I thought about every moment that had led to this. The years of neglect, the insults disguised as advice, the way they had convinced me that I was worthless unless I was like her. But that night, I stopped being their scapegoat. The next morning, I got a call from my bank. The fraud report had triggered a freeze on all joint family accounts linked to mine, including my parents', their mortgage payments, their credit cards, everything. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls. Mom, Dad, Madison, dozens of missed calls, voicemails ranging from tearful pleas to furious rants. I didn't answer any of them. Later that evening, Mom sent me a long text. "Ethan, this has gone too far. Your father is furious, and Madison's account is frozen. She can't pay her employees. You've humiliated this family. Please call me." Then another one, minutes later. "Your father says if you don't fix this, you're no longer welcome in this house." I read both messages, then powered off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't guilt or anger. I felt peace. But peace didn't last. Because a few days later, I received a letter in the mail from a law firm. It was a formal demand letter from my parents' attorney, claiming that I had illegally restricted access to joint family funds and that immediate restitution was required. They threatened to take me to court for breach of fiduciary duty. It was absurd, but it also told me one thing. They weren't going to stop. They didn't just want money, they wanted control. And if they couldn't guilt it out of me, they'd try to scare it out of me. That was the moment I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Madison's failing business anymore. It was about power. My parents couldn't stand the fact that I had built something without them, that I'd broken free of their control. And now, they were trying to drag me back under. But they had no idea that by crossing that line, by stealing from me, they'd set something in motion they couldn't take back. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to fight back. And the next move? That was going to be mine. The legal letter hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't that I thought they could actually win. I knew they couldn't. Every dollar in my company had been earned cleanly, documented, and legally separated from anything tied to my family years ago. But the fact that they'd gone this far, that my own parents had hired a lawyer to threaten me, that broke something in me I didn't even realize was still there. For a few days, I felt hollow. I stopped checking emails, skipped meetings, ignored calls from my assistant. My apartment, once quiet but peaceful, now felt like a cage. I'd built everything from nothing, and yet the moment I thought I was free, they reached out and pulled me back into their storm. I'd always told myself that distance was protection, that as long as I stayed focused on work, I'd be untouchable. But now, they'd crossed into my world, the one place I thought was safe. My lawyer, Daniel, sat across from me in the conference room, flipping through the demand letter with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "They're claiming joint family ownership over your business?" I nodded quietly. He frowned. "Based on what? I've gone through your corporate filings. You're the sole shareholder. Your parents have zero stake in anything." "They don't need a stake," I said. "They just need noise. Drama. Something to make me react." He leaned back. "So what do you want to do?" I hesitated. "Nothing," I said finally. "Not yet." Because I knew my parents. They'd expect me to fight back immediately, to send angry letters, to defend myself, to feed the conflict. That's how it always worked. They'd throw chaos at me, and I'd exhaust myself trying to make sense of it. But not this time. Instead, I waited. For the next few weeks, I went through the motions of my life, but everything felt heavier. My appetite disappeared. My focus slipped. Even my employees noticed. One of them, a quiet developer named Priya, asked me one morning if I was okay. "You've been different lately," she said gently. I just smiled. "Family stuff." She nodded like she understood, but she couldn't. Nobody could. At night, I'd sit by the window, staring at the ocean, wondering how things had turned so dark. The waves used to calm me. They used to make me feel small in a good way, like my problems were tiny ripples compared to the world. But now, the sound just reminded me how far I'd drifted from home. Still, I kept showing up. Because if there was one thing I'd learned since leaving that house, it was this: you don't stop moving, even when you're falling apart. The lawsuit never materialized. Not yet, anyway, but my parents' lawyer sent 2 more letters, each more threatening than the last. Then the gossip started. Relatives called to say they'd heard things. An aunt claimed my company was under investigation. A cousin texted me a screenshot of a Facebook post Madison had written. "Sometimes success goes to people who don't deserve it. Some of us actually work for what we have. Others just steal." The comments were full of sympathy. "You're so strong. Ignore the haters. Family can be so cruel." And every like, every share, every word of pity for her felt like another cut. But I stayed silent. Until one day, silence wasn't enough. Because while I was sitting in my office late one night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello." There was a pause, then a low voice. "Is this Ethan?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "This is Brian. I used to work for your sister." I sat up straighter. "Okay." He hesitated. "Look, I don't want trouble, but I thought you should know. She's been using your name. On paperwork, investor proposals, loan applications. She says you're a co-signer." My blood ran cold. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Positive," he said. "I quit because it got sketchy. The company's bleeding money, man. She's desperate. Said her brother's company could bail her out if the banks asked questions. I figured you'd want to know." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. Then I called Daniel. By the next morning, we'd pulled every record we could find: business registrations, loan filings, contracts. And there it was, clear as day. A falsified cosigner document with my forged signature attached. Madison had used my name to secure a $200,000 loan for her boutique. I wasn't angry. Not at first. Just numb. Because this wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was fraud. When I told my parents, their reaction wasn't shock or outrage. It was defensiveness. "She didn't mean any harm," Mom said. "She just needed help." She forged my signature. I said slowly. That's a felony. Dad's voice was calm but cold. You're not really going to press charges, are you? She's your sister. She committed a crime. She's family, he shouted. You don't drag family through the mud over money. And there it was again, that word. Family. The word they used when they wanted to excuse anything. I hung up without saying another word. For a few days, I didn't know what to do. My lawyer told me I had enough evidence to press charges. But part of me, some naive, aching part, still hesitated. Because no matter how much they'd done, they were still my family. But then I thought about that night 5 years ago. About the duffel bag, the car seat, the cold ocean air. About the way my father had said, "You're wasting space here." And I realized something. They'd never hesitated to ruin me. So I filed the report. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Madison was called in for questioning. The loan officers confirmed her signature didn't match mine. Within a week, her accounts were frozen. That's when the messages started pouring in again. This time, not from my parents, but from Madison herself. At first, they were angry. You think you're better than me? You've always been jealous. You ruined my life, Ethan. Then they turned desperate. Please. I didn't mean to. I just needed help. Mom and Dad said you'd fix it. Please don't let them take everything. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The police didn't arrest her. First-time offender, cooperation, restitution plan. But the damage was done. Her business went under within months. The $1 million boutique became an empty storefront with faded gold lettering and a for lease sign. My parents didn't speak to me again for months after that. Word spread through the family like wildfire. Ethan destroyed his sister. He took things too far. He forgot where he came from. But I didn't care. Because somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I found something I didn't realize I'd lost, my peace. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years. Every morning before work, I'd jog along the beach, headphones in, watching the sun crawl over the horizon. I rented a small office space by the water where I could hear the waves while I worked. My company grew, steadily, quietly, without noise or drama. I stopped trying to prove anything. Until one morning, months later, I got an email from a real estate agency. My offer on a beachfront villa had been accepted. It wasn't about showing off. It was about closing a circle. I'd lived in my car by that same beach years ago. Now, I owned a home overlooking it. I stood in the empty living room that first night, the ocean breeze spilling through the windows, and thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running away from my family. I felt like I was finally standing on my own ground. But life has a way of making sure the past doesn't stay buried for long. Because just when I thought I'd moved on, when I believed the story was over, I saw a familiar car pull up outside my villa. My parents stepped out first. And then, behind them, Madison. And from the look on her face, I could tell the storm wasn't over yet. I remember standing on the balcony of my new villa, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, when I saw their car. The silver Lexus I'd seen parked outside my parents' house countless times, now creeping along the street like it didn't want to be seen. It stopped just past my driveway, idling for a moment before pulling in. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen them since everything fell apart. Not after the fraud report, not after the fallout. A part of me had hoped they'd just move on, that maybe silence would be the cleanest ending we could get. But here they were, my parents and Madison, stepping out of the car, dressed as if this were just another polite visit. Madison wore oversized sunglasses and a beige coat that probably cost more than the average monthly rent. Mom clutched her purse with that same self-righteous tightness she always had before a serious talk. Dad walked a step ahead, his hand resting protectively on Madison's shoulder like she was still the fragile little angel who could do no wrong. I didn't move. I just sipped my coffee and waited. When they reached the gate, Mom called out first. "Ethan," she said brightly, like she was greeting an old friend. "You look wonderful. This place is beautiful." I didn't answer. Dad followed, his voice firm but fake friendly. "We were in the area. Thought we'd stop by. You know, see how you've been doing." I set my cup down on the railing. "You drove 3 hours to see how I've been doing." He hesitated, then smiled tightly. "You know your mother worries. And, well, it's been too long." Madison finally spoke, her voice soft, carefully rehearsed. "Hi, Ethan." I looked down at her. "Hi." There was silence. The waves crashed behind me. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Can we come in? It's chilly out here. I considered saying no, but I didn't. Something in me wanted to hear what they had to say. Inside, the air was awkward. They sat on my white couch like guests who didn't belong there, glancing around at the marble floors, the open view of the beach, the minimalist decor, the kind of space that said, I made this life myself. Mom smiled too wide. You've really done well for yourself, Ethan. We're proud of you. That word again. Proud. It didn't sound like pride. It sounded like an afterthought, like something she was supposed to say. I leaned against the counter. So what is this really? Dad sighed. It's not about the past. We've all made mistakes. What matters is family. Don't, I said sharply. Don't use that word again. Madison looked up, her voice shaky. Ethan, I'm sorry. For everything. For the money. For the lies. I didn't know what else to do. Her tone almost sounded genuine. Almost. I stayed quiet. She took off her sunglasses, revealing tired eyes. Red, puffy, desperate. I lost everything, she said softly. The house. The car. My savings. The bank took what little I had left. I'm staying with Mom and Dad now. I nodded slowly. And she hesitated. And I need help. Just a little. Not money. Guidance. I know you're good at this business stuff. I was hoping maybe we could partner on something new. I've been working on an idea. I actually laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. You forged my name, nearly got me investigated for fraud, and now you want to go into business with me? Her eyes filled with tears. Please, Ethan. I'm not asking for a handout. I just need a chance. Dad leaned forward. Son, she's learned her lesson. We all have. This family has been through enough. Why don't you show some compassion? I stared at him, that familiar wave of disbelief washing over me again. He still didn't get it. None of them did. Mom tried to soften the tone. Ethan, sweetheart, your sister's lost so much. You have the means to help her rebuild. Think of it as healing the family. I looked at Madison. You still think life's about who you can use next, don't you? Her expression hardened. The tears stopped instantly. That's not fair. Oh, it's fair, I said. You didn't come here for forgiveness. You came because you need something. Silence. That was the moment I realized they weren't here out of guilt or reconciliation. They were here because they needed me again. And they'd rehearsed this little performance all the way down the coast. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly guess, was that over the past few months, I'd built something far beyond what they imagined. After Madison's fraud case, my company had caught the attention of several investors who admired how cleanly I handled the situation. One of them, an older venture capitalist named Harold Evans, had become something of a mentor to me. He helped me structure my company more professionally, new subsidiaries, holding companies, asset protections. He taught me how to move quietly, how to protect what I'd built. And one of the assets I'd recently acquired through a business partnership, a commercial real estate group that managed, among other things, high-value retail properties along the coast, including the building that used to house Madison's boutique. I hadn't planned it. It was part of a bulk acquisition. But when I found out, I couldn't help but notice the irony. Now, sitting there, watching her ask me for help again, something clicked. I smiled. You said you've been working on an idea? Madison brightened immediately. Yes, it's a boutique concept again, but this time it's more sustainable, eco-friendly luxury goods. Organic fabrics, handcrafted candles, minimal waste. It's very on trend. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. Sounds interesting. Where were you planning to set up? She shrugged. Maybe back at my old location. It's still empty, right? I tilted my head. You're sure about that? Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Why? I smiled faintly. Because I bought that building 3 months ago. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. My parents exchanged glances. I didn't know, she said quietly. Of course you didn't, I replied. You don't keep track of anything that doesn't belong to you. Dad leaned forward. Ethan, what are you getting at? I'm saying, I said calmly. If you want to start your business there again, you'll need to go through my leasing company. And trust me, the rent isn't what it used to be. Madison's jaw tightened. That's cruel. No, I said. That's business. Mom's voice shook. You can't do that to your sister. I can, I said. And I already have. The silence that followed was the sweetest I'd ever heard. Madison stood abruptly. You think this makes you powerful, don't you? You think punishing me makes you better? I stood too, meeting her glare. No, I think it makes me free. She stared at me for a long moment before storming out, slamming the door behind her. Dad followed her, muttering something about ungrateful children. Mom lingered for a moment, looking at me with tears in her eyes. "You've changed, Ethan," she whispered. I nodded. "You're right." When the door closed, I sat back down and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But that wasn't the end. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. News spread that Madison was trying to open a new business, but no one would lease to her. Word of her fraud case had circulated among local property owners, and her reputation was shot. Then one morning, I got an email from her. "Ethan, I don't know what you've been telling people, but no one will rent to me. Every landlord says the same thing. We heard about your past. I'm begging you, please stop. I can't even get a bank account now." I didn't respond, but I didn't need to. The truth had done all the work for me. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel satisfied. What I felt was clarity. They'd spent years controlling me, dismissing me, taking from me. And now, without lifting a finger, I'd taken back something they could never reclaim, their illusion of power. I spent the next few months focused on work again. My company expanded into 3 countries, my investments grew, and my reputation in the business world solidified. I was invited to speak at a conference on resilience and entrepreneurship, something that would have made my father proud once upon a time. And then, one afternoon, I got a letter, not from my parents, not from Madison, but from my family's attorney. It wasn't a threat this time. It was an invitation. My parents were selling their home, the same one they'd kicked me out of, and they wanted me to consider buying it to keep it in the family. I almost laughed when I read it. The house that had once been their throne, their symbol of control, was now something they wanted me to preserve. I called my lawyer. "Buy it," I said simply. "All cash." Within 2 weeks, the deed was in my name. I didn't move in. I didn't even visit. I had the house appraised, cleaned, and quietly listed it for sale again. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. But when my parents found out, when they realized I'd bought their house just to sell it, they finally reached out again. Not through letters, not through lawyers, through Madison. She showed up at my villa one evening, trembling, eyes red from crying. "They're losing everything," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad can't afford the rent on their new place. They're scared." I stared at her. "And what do you want me to do?" Her voice broke. "I don't know. Maybe just talk to them. Please." I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted to say no, to shut the door and never look back. But another part of me, some small, tired fragment that still remembered who I used to be, wanted to see how far the fall had gone. So I agreed. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tell them I'll come by." And that's how I found myself, the next day, standing once again in front of the house I grew up in. Except this time, it wasn't their house anymore. It was mine. When I pulled into the driveway the next afternoon, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was chipped, the porch light hung at an angle, and the yard, once meticulously kept by my father, was overrun with weeds. It didn't look like the home I'd grown up in. It looked like a shell, hollowed out by the years and the pride that used to fill it. I parked, stepped out, and for a moment, just stood there, staring at the front door. The same door I'd walked through countless times, the same one they'd slammed behind me when I left at 24 with a duffel bag and nowhere to go. Now it was mine. Every nail, every board, every inch of it. Madison was waiting by the door. She looked smaller too, less polished, more human. The expensive coat was gone, replaced with an oversized sweater and sneakers. Her hair was tied back messily, her face pale. When she saw me, she smiled weakly. "They're inside," she said quietly. I nodded and followed her in. The smell hit me first. Dust, stale air, and something faintly sour. My mother sat on the couch, clutching a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. My father sat beside her, shoulders slumped, staring blankly at the floor. They both looked older, much older than the last time I'd seen them. The arrogance was gone. The certainty. All that was left was fatigue. Mom looked up first. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Ethan," she said softly, "thank you for coming." I stood in the doorway, saying nothing. Dad tried to smile. "You've done well, son. We heard about the company, the villa, the success." His voice cracked on the last word. "Why am I here?" I asked quietly. Mom set her cup down carefully. "We're selling the house. We can't afford the upkeep anymore. Your father's retirement funds are tied up, and," she hesitated, "we were hoping maybe you'd help." Buy it, keep it in the family. I already did, I said. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad frowned. What? I bought the house 2 weeks ago, I said calmly. Didn't your lawyer tell you? Mom's mouth opened slightly. You bought it. Yes, I said. It's mine now. Dad's face went pale. You can't just. I can, I said. And I did. He stood up, anger flashing in his eyes for the first time. You think this is funny? Buying your own parents' house out from under them? No, I said. I think it's poetic. Mom began to cry. Ethan, please. We've made mistakes, but this isn't right. We're your family. I took a deep breath. You stopped being my family the day you told me I was wasting space. The day you chose her over me. The day you stole from me, lied about me, and made me feel like I didn't belong. Madison stood by the wall, frozen, her eyes darting between us. Dad's voice shook. So what now? You're going to throw us out? You think that makes you a man? I looked at him for a long time. No, I said quietly. I think surviving you did. He flinched, but said nothing. Mom reached for my hand, but I stepped back. You don't have to do this, she whispered. We can start over. We can. I cut her off. You had years to start over. I begged you for a chance back then. I asked for respect, not money. I asked to be treated like I mattered. You gave me silence. You gave her everything. Madison finally spoke, her voice trembling. Ethan, please. They've lost everything. Don't make this worse. I turned to her. You forged my signature. You almost destroyed everything I built. And now you want me to fix the mess again? You've never learned, Maddie. You never will. Tears filled her eyes. I said I was sorry. I know, I said. But sorry doesn't undo years of damage. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock somewhere in the kitchen. It felt like time itself was holding its breath. Then I pulled a folder from my jacket and set it on the table. These are the sale documents, I said. The house will be listed next week. You have 30 days to move out. Mom gasped. Ethan, no, please. I shook my head. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to end it. To stop pretending there's anything left to save. Dad's jaw clenched. You think you're the victim in all this? You wouldn't even be standing here if we hadn't pushed you. I looked him dead in the eye. Then maybe you should have pushed harder. I might have gotten here sooner. He didn't have a response. Mom sobbed quietly into her hands. Madison stood motionless, tears sliding down her cheeks. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. When I reached it, I turned back one last time. You taught me that family means loyalty, but what you really meant was obedience. I spent years breaking myself trying to earn your love. Now I finally understand. I don't need it. Then I left. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange streaks across the lawn. The same yard I'd mowed as a kid, the same driveway I'd stood on the night they told me to leave. I walked down it slowly, feeling every step like it was closing a chapter I'd been stuck in for half my life. When I got to the car, Madison followed me out. Ethan, she called, running toward me. Wait. I turned. She stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. You don't have to do this. You could forgive them. You could forgive me. I looked at her sadly. You don't want forgiveness, Maddie. You want things to go back to the way they were. But that version of me, the one who'd give everything and expect nothing, that version died a long time ago. She swallowed hard. Then what now? You just drive away? Leave us with nothing? I nodded slowly. Exactly what you did to me. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to scream, to fight, to throw something like she always used to when things didn't go her way. But instead, she just stood there, eyes glistening, shoulders shaking. I hope someday you understand, I said quietly. Because I already have. Then I got into my car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing there as I drove away, small, broken, and silent. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness either. What I felt was freedom. Weeks later, I got the final update from my lawyer. The house had sold for nearly double what my parents paid for it. I didn't keep a cent. I had the proceeds quietly donated to a scholarship fund for kids who'd grown up with nothing. Kids who'd been told, like me once, that they'd never make it. The news of the sale reached my parents through Madison. She sent one last message. They're moving into a small apartment in the city. Mom cries a lot. Dad doesn't talk much. I hope you're happy now. I read it once, then deleted it. Because happiness wasn't the point. Peace was. Months later, standing on the balcony of my villa again, I watched the ocean stretch endlessly into the horizon. The same view I used to stare at from my car window, hungry and tired and invisible. Now it was mine, not because of revenge, but because I'd stopped chasing people who never wanted to see me win. I thought about calling them one last time. Thought about saying something, anything. But then I realized there was nothing left to say. They had chosen their story. I had chosen mine. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't revenge at all. It's silence. I finished my coffee, walked back inside, and closed the balcony doors behind me. That was the last time I ever looked back. I was 29 years old the night I sat alone in my brand new office, sweeping confetti off the floor that nobody had walked on. The place still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. I had spent months obsessing over every detail, from the glass-paneled conference room to the espresso machine in the kitchen. This was supposed to be the biggest night of my life, the grand opening of my company, something I had been working toward for nearly a decade. And yet, the chairs sat empty. The food I had catered was untouched, except for the lonely plate I ate just so it wouldn't go to waste. My name's James, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. The one who kept the peace, who showed up for every birthday, who lent money even when it meant eating noodles for a month. My younger brother, Kyle, was always the golden boy. Anything he did, no matter how reckless, was somehow framed as ambitious, charismatic, or just Kyle being Kyle. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters to find himself, my parents proudly announced that he was entrepreneurial. When he burned through 3 jobs in a year, they said he just hadn't found his passion yet. Meanwhile, I quietly put myself through school, worked double shifts at a warehouse, and lived in a studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. Every dollar I saved went toward this dream, starting my own company. Not a side hustle, not a passion project. A real, legal, registered company with employees and office space. Something that would last. So when I finally signed the lease and opened the doors, I thought my family would be proud. I sent out digital invites weeks in advance, even printed a few physical ones for my parents, because I knew they'd say they never saw the email. I arranged for champagne, music, a little speech to thank everyone who supported me. At 6 p.m., I stood by the entrance in my one good suit, waiting for the first familiar face to walk in. At 6:15, I told myself they were just running late. At 7, I refreshed my phone. No calls, no texts. No, we're on our way. At 8, I quietly told the caterer they could pack up the leftovers. I didn't cry. I just sat at one of the desks, sipping warm champagne from a plastic flute, staring at the empty lobby. The room echoed with every sound. All I could think was, after everything I've done for them, they couldn't even bother to show up for one night. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo in the family group chat. Kyle and my parents were standing in front of a brand new barbecue grill, laughing, holding drinks. The caption read, "Housewarming success." I stared at it for a long time. No, sorry we couldn't make it. No congratulations, James. Nothing. Just a casual broadcast that they had all chosen Kyle's housewarming over my grand opening without a second thought. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My stomach twisted, but part of me wasn't even surprised. I cleaned up the last of the decorations, turned off the lights, and went home. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." I just sat there, staring at the screen, my coffee going cold. My brother deserved a cut? Of what? He hadn't invested a cent, hadn't lifted a finger, hadn't even shown up to the launch. My company hadn't even made $1 yet. But suddenly, Kyle was entitled to part of it? I didn't answer right away. I just felt this wave of exhaustion, not just from the night before, but from years of being taken for granted. I could already picture how the conversation would go. Mom insisting that family comes first, Dad saying that Kyle needs this more than you do. Kyle probably sending me a list of reasons why his contribution, whatever that was, justified a percentage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something in me harden. That text wasn't just a request. It was a warning shot. And I had a choice. Roll over, like I always did, or do something different this time. I put my phone down, poured myself another coffee, and started thinking. And that's when I realized, maybe for the first time in my life, that I wasn't as powerless as they thought I was. I didn't reply to Mom's text that day, or the next. Instead, I watched the group chat light up with more photos of Kyle's housewarming. More inside jokes I wasn't part of. Each one just added fuel to the quiet fire building in my chest. By the end of the week, Mom sent another message. James, answer your phone. This is important. I did answer, eventually. And what I said next made her go completely silent. When I finally picked up the phone, Mom launched into her usual routine. No hello. No how are you? Just a clipped. James, we've been trying to reach you for days. I stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual, just enough for her to notice. What's going on? She pressed, as if I was the one acting strangely. You're asking me about profits, I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. But not one of you showed up to my company's launch. There was a pause, a long one. I pictured her standing in her kitchen, hand on her hip, already annoyed at being challenged. James, she finally said, in that patient but condescending tone she used when I was a kid. You know how important Kyle's housewarming was. Everyone was there. It wouldn't have been right to split up the family over one night. One night, I repeated. My voice came out flatter than I expected. This wasn't a dinner party. This was my business launch, something I've worked toward for years. She sighed, like I was the one being dramatic. You're overreacting. Kyle is just starting his life with Emily, and you'll have plenty of other events. Now about the profits. I actually laughed at that. A sharp, humorless sound that made her go silent for a second. Profits? Mom, I haven't even finished onboarding my first clients yet. There are no profits. Well, Kyle was saying that since he inspired you to start the company, he should get some sort of founder's share, or at least a family discount, since he wants to use your services for his own projects. That stopped me cold. Inspired me? I asked, incredulous. Mom, I've been planning this since college. Kyle didn't even know what I was working on until last month. She kept talking, completely ignoring my point. Look, your brother is trying to build his life. You're single, you don't have kids, you can afford to be generous. Think of this as helping the family. Helping the family. That line again. I told her I had to go and hung up before she could say anything else. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to blow over. My parents didn't see my company as mine. They saw it as the family's new resource. And Kyle was first in line with a plate, ready to take whatever he wanted. Over the next few weeks, it just got worse. Kyle texted me directly one afternoon. Hey bro, I was thinking, can you hook me up with a partnership package? Like, I'll promote your company to my friends, and in return, you give me a lifetime free account. Fair. I stared at the message, baffled. He had never promoted anything in his life except his own parties. When I didn't reply right away, he sent another. Mom said you'd probably say yes. Just let me know what I need to post. That's when I decided I wouldn't respond at all. A day later, Mom called again. James, why are you ignoring your brother? He's trying to help you grow your business. I asked her, very calmly, if she understood that what Kyle was asking for was essentially free labor. She brushed it off. It's just family. You're making such a big deal out of nothing. But the group chat told a different story. One night, Kyle sent a photo of his new patio furniture, writing, Thanks Mom and Dad for the loan. Another relative replied, What about James? Didn't he just launch something? Kyle, yeah, but he's being super weird about money lately. Mom chimed in, he's stressed. He'll come around. They were having entire conversations about me, about my money, my company, without me, right in front of me. Then came the kicker, an invitation to Kyle's networking barbecue. You should come, Mom said brightly when she called to follow up. Lots of people there could be good for your business. I asked who was going to be there. Oh, just some of Kyle's friends, people from his gym, Emily's family. Bring some business cards. I almost laughed. They skipped my launch, but now I was supposed to show up at Kyle's party and beg his friends for business? I didn't go. And that night, they sent a group picture of the whole family standing around the grill, captioned, So much fun. We missed you, James. The "we missed you" stung more than I expected. Like it was my fault for not playing along with their narrative. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I got an email from my accountant saying that someone, using my mother's email address, had inquired about adding a family partner to my company's banking account. They didn't have access, of course, but just the fact that they had tried made my stomach drop. I called Mom immediately. Oh, that, she said, sounding annoyed. I was just trying to make things easier for you. This way Kyle could handle some of the finances and take the stress off your plate. I was quiet for a long time. James, don't ever do that again, I said finally. My voice was low, steady. You don't touch my accounts. You don't ask about my accounts. This company is mine. She huffed. You don't have to be so territorial. We're just looking out for you. But I didn't believe that anymore. I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window. The city below was alive with people living their lives, making their own choices. And here I was, letting my family make me feel like a child. For the first time, I started thinking seriously about what it would mean to set boundaries, real boundaries. Not just saying no once, but actually making sure they couldn't take from me again. The very next day, Kyle sent me a new text. Bro, did you see the new patio heater I bought? You should come check it out. Also, when are we getting that family discount? Dad said you're being stingy. Something in me shifted. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into every single account with my name on it. Joint streaming services, shared utilities, even the old family phone plan, and started making a list. Because if they thought they were entitled to everything I had built, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. And I wasn't going to warn them this time. 2 weeks passed. I was busy onboarding my first real clients, spending long nights at the office, drinking too much coffee, living off takeout, and honestly, feeling proud of myself. For a moment, I thought the family drama might cool off if I just stayed quiet and focused on my work. But then came the weekend that flipped everything. It was a Saturday morning, and I had planned to sleep in for the first time in weeks. Around 7:30 a.m., my phone started buzzing relentlessly. First a call from Mom, then Dad, then Kyle, then Mom again. I groaned, rolled over, and ignored it. A minute later, a notification popped up from my company's internal dashboard, a flagged access attempt. Someone was trying to log in from an unknown device. I sat straight up in bed. I opened my laptop and checked the logs. Sure enough, there had been 3 failed login attempts from an IP address that was suspiciously close to my parents' neighborhood. Someone had been trying to get into my business account, and not just casually. They were guessing passwords. My stomach dropped. I called Mom immediately. "Oh, good. You're awake," she said cheerfully, as if this was a normal Saturday morning. "We were just talking about how to get you some help. Kyle and I were thinking you're working too hard, and if we had access to some of the systems, we could process payments for you. Maybe keep track of client invoices." "You tried to log in," I said flatly. Silence. "You tried to get into my company account," I repeated, my voice rising. "Well, yes, but only because you've been so secretive lately," she said defensively. "We thought maybe you were overwhelmed. This way we could." "You had no right," I snapped. "None. You don't touch my company. You don't even ask before doing something like that." She sounded offended. "James, you're making it sound like we're criminals. We're your family. We just want to help." "Help?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Mom, you skipped my launch, you gossip about me in the group chat, you demand money I don't have, and now you try to break into my accounts. That's not help." She sniffed, and her voice got that sharp edge I knew so well. "You're being ungrateful. Your father and I raised you, supported you through school, and this is the thanks we get? Locking us out." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to breathe. "You didn't pay for my school, Mom." "I did. You didn't support me when I was saving for this company. You barely even knew what I was doing until I signed the lease." "That's not the point," she said coldly. "This family shares everything. You've been acting like you're better than us, hoarding your success. It's selfish." I didn't trust myself to say anything else. I just hung up. 10 minutes later, Kyle texted me. "Really, dude? Mom says you yelled at her. Chill. She was just trying to make sure you don't mess anything up. Also, I already told Emily we'd get that family plan discount, so don't make me look bad." I put the phone down, shaking. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just a boundary issue anymore. They genuinely believed they were entitled to what I had built. By Monday, it escalated again. I got to my office and found an envelope shoved under the door. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from my father. "James, we've been patient with you, but your attitude lately is unacceptable. Your mother and I have talked, and we think it's time you start giving back to the family in a real way. We propose a family stipend, 15% of your monthly revenue, to be distributed fairly between your parents and your brother. Consider this a way of honoring where you came from." I sat there in my office, gripping the letter so hard the paper crinkled. My father, the man who hadn't even bothered to attend the most important night of my career, was now formally requesting a cut of my revenue. Not profits. Revenue. Before expenses. before salaries. It was so absurd I almost laughed, but the laugh caught in my throat because I knew they were serious. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time I had bailed Kyle out of trouble. The time I covered his rent when he blew his paycheck on a business opportunity. The time I co-signed a loan so he could buy a car, only for him to miss 3 payments and tank my credit score. The time Mom called me crying because Kyle had gotten into a fight at a bar and needed money for legal fees. Every single time, I had shown up. And this was how they repaid me, by trying to worm their way into my livelihood before it had even had a chance to grow. The next weekend was the final nail in the coffin. I was out with a friend grabbing lunch when I got a notification that my company's office alarm had been triggered. My stomach lurched. I rushed back to the building and found my brother standing outside the office door, fiddling with the keypad. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the hallway. He jumped, looking guilty for half a second before plastering on a grin. "Relax, man. Mom said you wouldn't mind if I grabbed a few things. I told Emily I'd show her around your office." "You tried to break in," I said, my voice cold. "It's not breaking in if it's family," he said with a shrug, as if that was the most reasonable thing in the world. I just stared at him. For a second, I didn't even know what to say. "You need to leave," I finally said, each word measured. He scoffed. "Wow, really? You think you're too good for us now?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "If you ever try to get into this office again without my permission, I will call the police." His grin faltered. "You wouldn't. Try me." He left, muttering something under his breath. When the door shut behind him, I locked it and just stood there, my hands trembling. That was it. That was the line. They had crossed from disrespect into outright violation. For the rest of the weekend, I didn't answer a single call or text. I sat at my desk, going over every single system I had, business accounts, personal accounts, security settings, and started tightening everything down. Because I knew now that this wasn't just about boundaries. This was war. And if they wanted to treat my company like their personal ATM, they were about to find out what it meant when I shut the door, for good. The Monday after catching Kyle at my office, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. My body wasn't sore, it was my chest, my stomach, my head. Everything felt heavy. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my phone as it buzzed over and over. Mom called twice, then Dad, then Kyle, each one leaving voicemails that got angrier by the hour. "James," Mom's voice snapped on the latest one. "Your brother said you threatened to call the police on him. This is ridiculous. You need to apologize before this family falls apart completely." I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted it, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. I made coffee on autopilot and sat down at the table, just staring at the steam curling out of the mug. For years, my family had been my safety net, even if they were dysfunctional. They were loud, entitled, and manipulative, but they were still my family. And I had been trained since childhood to put their feelings first, to keep the peace. But now, keeping the peace was eating me alive. I barely noticed when tears started running down my face. Not loud, sobbing tears, just quiet, hot ones that blurred my vision until I had to set the mug down so I wouldn't spill it. I didn't cry often. I had trained myself not to. But that morning, I felt hollow. Like all the energy I had poured into building this dream had been drained by the very people who were supposed to celebrate it. I called in sick to the office that day. My assistant covered for me while I sat on the couch with my laptop, not working, not watching TV, just staring. At one point, I opened the family group chat, scrolled all the way back, and reread months of messages. Every sarcastic joke at my expense. Every time Kyle was praised for doing the bare minimum. Every time my parents brushed off my achievements like they were no big deal. And as I read, something started to shift. At first, it was just anger, sharp and bitter. But underneath the anger, there was this deep ache. I had bent over backwards to earn their approval, to make them proud, and it was never enough. By the end of the day, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to try anymore. The next few weeks were brutal. I started avoiding family events entirely. If Mom called, I let it go to voicemail. If Dad texted, I ignored it. I worked later hours, sometimes sleeping at the office just so I wouldn't have to deal with seeing them. But the silence didn't make them go away. Instead, they doubled down. Mom showed up at my apartment one afternoon, knocking on the door like she owned the place. When I opened it a crack, she immediately started in. "James, this is childish. You can't keep cutting us out just because you're upset. Your brother is hurt. He was only trying to help. Trying to help by breaking into my office. I asked, my voice tired. You're exaggerating, she said, waving a hand. He just wanted to see the space. You should be flattered he cares enough to get involved. I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pull of guilt. Just distance. I'm busy, I said, and shut the door before she could respond. I leaned against it, heart pounding, but also feeling something strange, a flicker of relief. The next weekend, I skipped a big family dinner that had been on the calendar for months. Mom sent me 20 texts in a row, everything from guilt trips, your grandmother was asking about you, to anger, you're embarrassing us by not showing up, to veiled threats, if you keep this up, don't expect us to support you when things get tough. I didn't reply to any of them, but the silence came with a price. Work got harder. I was exhausted all the time, my mind constantly replaying arguments that hadn't even happened yet. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking about Kyle standing at my office door, smirking like it was all a game. I was irritable with my employees, short with friends, even clumsy with small tasks. One night, I stayed at the office until dawn just running numbers, terrified that I'd miss something critical and the whole business would collapse, and my family would swoop in and say, see, this is why you needed us. But little by little, something else started forming under all that fear and exhaustion. Clarity. One Friday night, I sat in my office with a notepad and just started writing. Not emails, not work tasks, just a list. I wrote down every account my name was on that my family could access. Every shared bill, every streaming service, every old account that still had Kyle or my parents listed as secondary users. Then I wrote down all the ways they could potentially interfere with my business, from trying to access accounts, to calling vendors, to showing up uninvited. It wasn't just a to-do list. It was a blueprint, because I realized that if I didn't take control now, this would never stop. I spent the entire weekend acting on that list. I called my bank and added extra security measures. I set up two-factor authentication on every platform. I moved my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. I spoke to my attorney about locking down the company paperwork so no one could make changes without my consent. Each step made me feel a little lighter. By Sunday night, I sat back in my chair, staring at the office ceiling, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Calm. Not happy, not triumphant, but calm. Because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what my family did. I was preparing. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, I was going to be ready. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. It's strange how much lighter the world feels when you finally stop begging for someone else's approval. After that weekend of locking things down, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for texts from mom or dad, stopped replaying arguments in my head, stopped wondering what they were saying about me in the group chat. Instead, I started focusing on what I could control and what I could build. The next Monday, I came into the office before sunrise. The city was quiet, still waking up, and for the first time in months, I felt excited to be there. I made a fresh pot of coffee, sat down with my notebook, and mapped out the next 3 months of company growth. My first few clients were small, but word of mouth was spreading. One referral led to another, and soon I had meetings lined up with bigger players, the kind of contracts that could stabilize the company's finances for a whole year. And without the constant background noise of my family pulling at me, I was sharper, more focused. One by one, the deals started closing. I remember the first major client I landed, a mid-sized firm that had been shopping around for months. After our final pitch meeting, the CEO shook my hand and said, "James, you clearly care about what you're building. That's why we're choosing you." I walked out of that meeting grinning like an idiot. When the contract came through, I stayed at the office late that night just to run the numbers twice, making sure it was real. When I finally saw the revenue projections, I leaned back in my chair and just stared at the ceiling, a smile creeping across my face. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was growth. And with growth came options. The next few weeks, I invested in better equipment for the office, hired a part-time assistant to handle admin work, and even brought in a consultant to help streamline operations. Each improvement made the business run smoother, freeing up more of my time to focus on strategy. It felt good, better than good, to see something I had poured years of effort into finally thrive. But the best part wasn't the money or the success. It was the confidence. I stopped feeling small when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom or Kyle. I stopped dreading running into them at the grocery store. In fact, I started ignoring them entirely. One afternoon, Mom left me a long voicemail, full of sighs and dramatic pauses. "James, this has gone on long enough. Your brother is hurt. Your father and I are hurt. We just want to sit down and figure out a way to work together. Family is supposed to share." I didn't call her back. Instead, I listened to the message twice, calmly deleted it, and went right back to reviewing a new contract that was worth more than my first 3 clients combined. And then something interesting happened. Kyle texted me, not with demands this time, but with a question. "Hey bro, do you know anyone hiring? Things are kinda tight right now." I stared at the screen for a long moment. I could have ignored him. I could have gloated. But instead, I typed back, "No, sorry. Things are busy here." And that was it. The power dynamic had shifted. I didn't need to yell or argue. I didn't need to explain myself. For the first time in my life, I had the freedom to simply not engage. And that silence drove them crazy. The texts started coming more frequently. Kyle asked if I could lend him money to cover rent. Mom asked if I could pay for a family trip they had already booked since they were a little short right now. Dad left me a message saying he'd heard about my new clients and that it was only fair to share some of the success. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I kept growing. Within a few months, I had doubled my revenue. I moved the company to a slightly bigger office with more natural light and room to expand. I bought new furniture, upgraded our software, and even hired a junior project manager to take some of the workload off my shoulders. For the first time, I felt like a real CEO. And that's when I started thinking about the next phase, not just surviving, not just growing, but using my position to protect myself permanently. I set up a separate holding company for my assets, moved my intellectual property into it, and arranged things so that if anyone ever tried to interfere legally, they'd have to go through multiple layers just to figure out what I even owned. I also updated my will, something most people my age don't even think about, making sure everything was locked down and out of reach of anyone who might try to claim a piece of it for the good of the family. Each step made me feel stronger, calmer, and more in control. But the irony was that the more I pulled away, the louder my family got. Mom started sending guilt-laden emails about how she missed her son. Kyle posted vague rants on social media about selfish people who forget where they came from. Dad left messages about needing to talk about the future of the family. At one point, Kyle even showed up outside my office again, but this time he couldn't get in. I had upgraded the security system to require access cards and cameras. I watched him on the feed, pacing, knocking once or twice, then finally leaving. When the alert popped up on my phone that the system had recorded footage, I saved it, just in case. Because as proud as I was of how far I had come, I knew one thing for sure. They weren't done. They would try again. And when they did, I wasn't going to just sit there and take it. I was going to be ready, not just to protect what I had built, but to make sure they understood, once and for all, that they couldn't treat me like this anymore. And for the first time, I felt a strange sort of anticipation. Because I wasn't just surviving their attacks anymore. I was waiting for them to make the next move, so I could finally make mine. By the time spring rolled around, my company was in the best shape it had ever been. I had a small but loyal team, recurring contracts with several mid-sized firms, and enough cash flow that I didn't have to think twice about payroll. The business no longer felt fragile. It felt stable. And that stability gave me the mental space to look at the bigger picture. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building a shield. One Friday afternoon, I was going through paperwork with my attorney, signing off on some final protections for the holding company, when he casually asked me, "You mentioned family disputes last time we met. Do you still want to include a clause barring them from ever having financial power over the business?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. He nodded, adding a note to the document. "Good call. You'd be surprised how many disputes we see when a business starts doing well. Families can be complicated." I almost laughed. Complicated was an understatement. After the meeting, I decided to take a long walk through the city. The weather was warm, and for the first time in a while, I let myself slow down and think. That's when I noticed something strange. I hadn't heard from my family in nearly 2 weeks. No texts, no voicemails, no surprise visits. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally backed off. But then I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, a family friend who owned a small accounting firm. James, I just thought you should know, he said, lowering his voice. Your brother came by my office last week asking questions about how to set up a business partnership, and he mentioned your company by name. I stopped in my tracks. What did he say exactly? He said you'd probably make him a partner soon, but he wanted to get ahead of the paperwork so it wouldn't take too long. Sounded pretty confident about it. I thanked him for the heads up, hung up, and just stood there on the sidewalk for a minute, letting the anger wash over me. Kyle was planning something. And if I knew my brother, it wasn't going to be small. That weekend, I finally opened the group chat again, not to respond, just to watch. Sure enough, there it was. Mom, we're thinking of having a family meeting next weekend to discuss some exciting opportunities. Kyle, yeah, can't wait to share what I've been working on. Dad, James, you should really be there. This could be big for all of us. I put the phone down and felt something shift inside me. For months, I had been on the defensive, blocking them, locking things down, trying to keep them from interfering. But now I had leverage. Because here was the truth. My company was no longer a fragile startup. It was profitable, secure, and thanks to the restructuring, I was the only one with legal authority to make decisions about it. Even if Kyle marched into a lawyer's office tomorrow claiming he was entitled to a share, there was nothing they could do. And the best part? They didn't know that yet. That night, I sat at my desk with a legal pad and started writing. Not just notes this time. Plans. I listed every point of contact I still had with my family, every account they could benefit from, every small tie they still had to my life. Then I listed ways to sever each one, slowly, strategically, without warning. I also started looking at my company through a new lens, not just as my livelihood, but as my fortress. What would it take to make it completely unassailable? I upgraded the security system again, this time with biometric access. I had my lawyer draft a document formally excluding any family members from ever being granted shares or voting rights. I even spoke to a PR contact about what would happen if someone tried to drag my company into a public dispute and how we could get ahead of the story. Piece by piece, I was building an environment where my family couldn't touch me. And then something unexpected happened that gave me the final piece of leverage I didn't even know I needed. One of my new clients was a real estate developer, the same one who, as it turned out, was negotiating with my brother for a home improvement contract. During a meeting, the developer casually mentioned Kyle's name, asking if we were related. I kept my face neutral and nodded. Funny guy, the developer said with a chuckle. He's trying to get us to front him some money for the job before he delivers. Said he's good for it because his family business is doing so well. My eyebrows went up. Family business? Yeah. He said his brother owns a company that could back him if needed. I didn't correct him. I just smiled faintly and made a mental note. Because now I had something my brother didn't realize I had. Influence. Quiet, subtle influence. The kind that didn't require yelling or fighting. Just a well-placed word here and there to make sure the truth came out when it mattered. By the time the family meeting rolled around, I was ready. Not just emotionally, but strategically. I had all the documentation proving my sole ownership. I had backups of every security log showing their attempted interference. I had the financial reports that showed exactly how much work I had done to make this company succeed. And most importantly, I had the calm clarity to know that whatever they tried next, I could handle it. The night before the meeting, I sat in my office long after everyone had gone home, looking around at the space I had built from nothing. The polished concrete floors, the soft hum of the server rack in the corner, the faint glow of the city lights outside. This was mine. And tomorrow, they were going to learn that lesson, one way or another. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Because the setup was done, all that was left was to let them make their move and then play mine. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, the same house where I'd spent countless holidays sitting at the kids' table while Kyle held court as the center of attention. This time, I didn't feel like a kid walking into enemy territory. I arrived on time, dressed in a suit, calm and collected. When Mom opened the door, her eyebrows shot up. "Well, don't you look formal," she said, half amused, half wary. "This is a business meeting," I said evenly, stepping inside. Kyle was already at the dining table, leaning back in a chair with a smug little grin. Dad sat at the head, looking serious, as if he was presiding over something official. "Glad you could make it," Dad said. "Let's sit down and talk like adults." I took a seat across from Kyle, who immediately launched into his pitch. "So here's the deal," he said, spreading out a few papers as if this was his boardroom. "I've got a line on a great project, but I need some capital to get it going. Once it takes off, it'll benefit the whole family. Since your company is doing well, we figured you could front the investment, just a small percentage of your revenue each month, and we'll consider you an official partner." He leaned back, clearly expecting applause. Mom nodded approvingly. "See? This is what we meant about working together. Everyone contributes, everyone wins." I let them talk for a few more minutes, just listening, my hands folded on the table. When they finally stopped, waiting for me to agree, I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" Dad asked. "Documentation," I said calmly. "My company's operating agreement, ownership records, financials, everything showing that I am the sole founder, shareholder, and decision maker. And before you ask, no, there will be no partnership, no revenue sharing, no family stipend. This company is mine, legally and permanently." Kyle frowned. "Whoa, what's with the lawyer talk? We're family. You don't have to make it so official." "Yes," I said evenly, "I do. Because the last time we had a casual understanding, someone tried to access my accounts without permission. Someone tried to get into my office. And someone sent me a letter demanding 15% of my revenue, as if it was their right." Mom bristled. "That was your father's idea. I have it in writing." I interrupted, my voice firm but quiet. "And if anything like that happens again, I won't hesitate to involve law enforcement." The room went silent. For a long moment, all I heard was the faint ticking of the wall clock. "You wouldn't," Dad said finally, his voice low. "I would," I said simply. "I have security footage, logs, emails, and a lawyer who's fully briefed. This isn't a threat, it's a boundary. You don't cross it again." Kyle snorted, trying to play it off. "You think you're so big now, huh? Just because you're making money." I smiled, not cruelly, just calmly. "No, I think I've finally learned that I don't owe you my success. And I definitely don't owe you access to it." Before they could respond, I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers, termination notices for every shared account, and bill that still had my name on it. "These," I said, placing them on the table, "are the last ties between my finances and this family. Phone plan, streaming accounts, insurance policies, all canceled or transferred. Effective immediately." Mom's mouth fell open. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. And I did. Kyle's smug expression was gone now, replaced with a flush of anger. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of dictator. All we wanted was a little help. You wanted control," I said, meeting his eyes. "And you wanted it without doing any of the work. That ends today." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on the defensive. I felt steady. I stood, gathering my folder and slipping it back into my bag. "This conversation is over," I said quietly. "If you'd like to have a relationship with me, it will be on respectful terms. Otherwise, consider this the last time we'll be meeting like this." I walked out of that house without looking back. But the revenge wasn't done, not yet. Over the next few weeks, I made sure the message stuck. When Kyle tried to name-drop my company to a potential client of his, they called me first to confirm the partnership. I politely informed them there was no partnership and never would be. The deal fell through. When Mom tried to guilt-trip me by sending photos of family gatherings with captions like, "We miss you," I didn't respond. When she finally called to demand an explanation, I said calmly, "I'm busy running a company. You know, the one you all ignored. And I don't have time for manipulation." Word spread fast. Family friends started reaching out, not to scold me, but to quietly say they understood. Some even told me they were proud of me for standing up for myself, something I'd never heard from my own parents. And the best part? The more they pushed, the calmer I got. I didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't send long emotional texts. I just enforced my boundaries with quiet consistency. Every single time. And slowly, it started to sink in. The calls became less frequent. The messages grew shorter. The demands stopped entirely. Because they were finally starting to realize that the old James, the one who would cave under guilt, who would show up with his wallet open just to keep the peace, was gone. And in his place was someone they couldn't manipulate anymore. It didn't happen overnight. For a few weeks, the silence felt almost eerie. No texts, no calls, no sudden knocks on my office door. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message. But then the fallout hit. One Friday morning, I was reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, one of Kyle's contractors. "Sorry to bother you," the man said, "but your brother told us you were his financial backer. We just wanted to confirm before moving forward with materials." I felt that calm, deliberate anger settle over me. "No," I said evenly. "My company does not back any of Kyle's ventures. Please make sure you get everything in writing from him before you start work." The man thanked me, sounding both surprised and relieved. It was clear he'd been burned before. Later that day, Kyle called me, furious. "You just cost me a contract," he shouted the second I answered. "No, Kyle," I said, keeping my voice level. "You cost yourself a contract by lying about my company's involvement." "You're such a jerk," he snapped. "Do you know how hard it is out here? You could have just said yes and helped me out." "I don't reward dishonesty," I said simply, and hung up. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Within a month, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Kyle had lost 2 more clients. Word had spread that he was unreliable, that he promised financial backing he didn't actually have. Meanwhile, my company kept growing. I signed 2 major new contracts and hired another team member. We moved into a bigger office with an entire floor to ourselves. And then came the family barbecue, the first one I had been invited to in months. Mom called me personally. "James," she said, her tone unusually soft, "we'd really like you to come. Things have been tense. Your father and I want to talk." I debated saying no, but something in me knew this was the moment. When I arrived, the atmosphere was strained. Kyle sat at the picnic table, sullen, picking at his plate. Dad looked tired. Mom looked like she had rehearsed a speech. "James," she began, "we just want to put all this behind us. Family is more important than money." I almost laughed, but I kept my expression calm. "Funny," I said, "because money was the only thing you wanted from me for months." Mom flinched. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair," I said quietly. "You skipped the most important night of my life to go to a housewarming. You tried to get into my accounts. You demanded a percentage of my revenue before I'd even broken even. And when I said no, you tried to guilt me into giving you access anyway." Dad sighed. "We made mistakes. But surely you can forgive." "I can," I said, cutting him off. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean letting you keep taking." Kyle finally spoke up, his voice sharp. "You think you're better than us now, just because you have money." I turned to him, calm as ever. "No, Kyle. I think I've stopped letting you use me as your backup plan. And you don't like it." He didn't respond. I stood then, taking my time, letting the silence stretch. "Here's the truth," I said, looking at each of them. "I built this company from nothing. I sacrificed years of my life for it. And you didn't just fail to support me. You actively tried to take from me. That ends now. We will not be doing business together. We will not be sharing accounts. If you want a relationship with me, it will be as family, not as shareholders." I started walking toward the gate, then paused, turning back one last time. "And if you ever try to cross that line again, to get into my accounts, my office, or my business, I will treat you the same way I'd treat any other trespasser." Their faces were a mix of shock and anger, but nobody said a word. I left without another glance. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the fragile, quiet kind I used to cling to, but something solid. That night, I sat in my new office, looking out over the city skyline. My team had gone home hours ago. The space was silent except for the faint hum of the servers. I thought about all the times I had bent over backward for my family, all the times I had sacrificed my own goals to keep them happy. And I smiled, because now, finally, they understood. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "We'll respect your wishes. We just hope someday you'll come back to the family." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a photo of the office, the polished floors, the clean desks, the name of my company glowing on the wall, and sent it to the group chat with a single message. "You had your chance to be part of this. That chance is gone." And then I muted the chat for good. I leaned back in my chair, closed my laptop, and let out a long breath. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing outside the family looking in. I felt like I had built a life and a future entirely my own. And this time, no one could take it from me. My name's Owen, and I'm 39. I've never been one for drama, never needed to be the center of attention. I'm more of a fix-it-with-my-hands kind of guy. Grew up with 3 brothers, a quiet mom, and a father who said little but meant every word. You could say I was raised to value peace over conflict, patience over pride. So when I met Angela, it wasn't some grand romantic whirlwind. It was a steady, slow burn. She was kind, warm, grounded. A single mom with a daughter already in high school, and still carrying the weight of a messy divorce that had left some cracks in her family. But we clicked. Not just sparks and butterflies, but something solid, real. I didn't come into Angela's life trying to replace anyone, least of all her daughter's father. I knew better than that. Her daughter, Lacey, was 16 when I met her. She had her mom's green eyes, but that was about where the similarities ended. Where Angela was calm and thoughtful, Lacey was fire and fury, all sharp edges and standoffish glares. I told myself it made sense. Teenagers are rough. A new guy in the house. Of course she'd be suspicious. Her parents had divorced just a year prior. I knew I had to earn her trust. So I did what I always do. I tried. Quietly. Consistently. I offered rides when Angela had late shifts. I remembered her favorite ice cream. I fixed the lock on her bedroom door without being asked. Nothing grand. Just steady. But with Lacey, nothing I did ever landed quite right. There was always this layer of coldness. Like every time I entered a room, I was stepping into a silent standoff. I didn't push it. I figured time would soften things. People grow up. Wounds heal. That's what I kept telling myself. Angela noticed the tension, of course. She'd talk to Lacey behind closed doors, come out with this worried look on her face, then brush it off with a soft smile. She just needs time, she'd say. It's not you, Owen. She's still holding on to a lot of anger from the divorce. And I believed her. I wanted to. So I stayed patient. For months. Even when Lacey would make little jabs at dinner, muttering, "Must be nice to play house with someone else's family." Even when she refused to sit in the car if I was driving. Even when she accidentally let our dog out the side gate after I spent hours putting in a new latch. I chalked it all up to grief, anger, youth. I didn't want to be the reason Angela had more stress. But things shifted after I moved in. Angela and I had been dating for nearly 2 years by then, and we decided it was time. The lease on my apartment was up, and the idea of building something real, something shared, felt right. Angela seemed happy. She painted the guest room together with me. We even talked about maybe getting a place of our own in a couple of years when Lacey went off to college. Lacey, on the other hand, acted like I'd personally declared war on her life. The day I moved in, she didn't say a single word. Just watched me from the top of the stairs like I was hauling in boxes full of poison. I tried to joke, offered to let her have first dibs on the leftovers in the fridge. She didn't even smirk. Just turned and walked off like I wasn't there. I should have taken that moment more seriously. The first real blow-up happened 2 weeks later. It was over something stupid. Leftover Chinese food. I'd written my name on a container of sesame chicken, not because I was being petty, but because I was planning to bring it for lunch the next day. But it was gone by morning. When I asked Angela, she said she hadn't touched it. Lacey, standing a few feet away scrolling on her phone, just smirked and said, "Oops. Must have been the homewrecker ghost." Angela's head snapped around. Lacey. But Lacey just rolled her eyes and walked off. I stood there holding an empty takeout container, more stunned than anything. It wasn't the food. It wasn't even the insult. It was the way she said it, like she'd been waiting to say it. Like it was something she'd been chewing on for months, and now she finally felt bold enough to spit it out. Angela apologized, said she'd talk to her. And maybe she did, but things only got colder from there. It wasn't just the name calling, though that certainly escalated. It was the quiet war. Doors slamming just a little too hard when I was on a call. My tools accidentally knocked off the shelf in the garage. Her blasting music when Angela and I tried to have a quiet night in. One night, she unplugged the Wi-Fi in the middle of a movie we were watching, then claimed she was trying to vacuum. The plug was 3 rooms away from any carpet. Every time I brought it up, Angela looked more and more tired. "She's a teenager," she'd say. "She's acting out. I'm doing my best, Owen." And I knew she was. She was stuck between the man she loved and the daughter she was trying not to lose. I never wanted to put her in that position, so I kept swallowing it, telling myself I was the adult here. I could take it. But what I didn't realize is that when someone keeps stomping on your patience, it stops looking like grace. It starts looking like weakness. The tipping point came on a Sunday afternoon. I was out back replacing a broken fence panel. Angela had run to the store. Lacey came outside, holding her phone in one hand and a half-empty iced coffee in the other. She watched me work for a minute, then said, "You know she was happier before you showed up." I didn't respond. I just kept drilling. But my heart skipped. It wasn't the first time she'd thrown something like that at me. But this time, she wasn't snarking. She was serious. Her voice had weight. "She and my dad weren't perfect," she continued, stepping onto the grass. "But they were our family. And then you came in, smiling, fixing stuff, playing pretend, acting like you belong." I set the drill down and turned to her. Calmly, "I've never tried to replace anyone, Lacey." She scoffed. "No, you just slid in like a parasite. Quiet, harmless, sucking everything out of what we had. That one hit different." "You're calling me a homewrecker?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Yeah, I am. You stole my mom. And you know what? I hope you rot alone when she finally wakes up and realizes what she gave up for you." I stood there in silence. Not because I was stunned, I wasn't anymore, but because something inside me shifted. Like a light bulb finally clicked on after years of flickering. She didn't just dislike me. She despised me. She wasn't lashing out because she was hurt. She truly believed I didn't belong. And for the first time, I realized maybe she was right. I didn't say another word. I didn't defend myself. I didn't wait for Angela to come home. I just walked inside, packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left. Not in anger. Not in spite. Just done. The last thing I heard before I closed the door behind me was Lacey calling out, "Finally." But what she didn't see, what she couldn't have predicted, was the look on her mother's face when she returned home to find nothing but a single note on the kitchen counter and an empty house. That was just the beginning. Angela called me 17 times that night. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't doing it to punish her. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just couldn't. I was sitting in my old truck in a grocery store parking lot, trying to make sense of everything. I'd driven without thinking, past the city limits, past anything familiar, until the sun dipped low and the ache in my chest grew louder than the hum of the engine. I didn't cry. I'm not really a crying kind of guy, but I stared at my hands gripping the wheel and felt more hollow than I ever had in my life. Her first message was panicked. "Owen, where are you? Are you okay? Please call me." The second was confused. "Did something happen? You didn't say anything. You just left." Then the third, quieter. "Lacey said something, didn't she? I'll talk to her. Please come home. We can fix this." Home. The word felt wrong now. Crooked, like a door hanging off one hinge. I checked into a cheap motel off the highway. Ate a vending machine granola bar for dinner. Tried to sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lacey's face. Not angry, victorious. Angela showed up at my work the next morning. I wasn't surprised. She knew my schedule better than anyone. She waited in the parking lot, arms crossed, eyes red. I almost turned back around, but something in me said I owed her a conversation. At least one. She walked up slowly, like I was some wild animal she was afraid of scaring off. "Can we talk?" I nodded and followed her to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a full minute before speaking. She told me what she said. All of it. I didn't respond. "I'm not going to defend her," she said softly. "I can't." What she said was cruel. Another pause. "But she's my daughter." I finally looked at her. "I never asked you to choose." She turned to me, voice breaking. "But you did. Every time you swallowed your pride. Every time you let her treat you like that. You gave me the choice, and I chose not to make it, because I didn't want to lose either of you." I wanted to say I understood, but I didn't. Not really. I couldn't imagine watching someone you love be disrespected again and just letting it happen. "She was hurting," Angela said. "Still is. So was I." We didn't speak for a long time after that. She eventually drove away. I went back to work. The weeks that followed were quiet. I stayed in that motel longer than I should have. Spent most nights on job sites, driving back late with sore muscles and an empty stomach. I told no one what happened. Not even my brother, who I usually talked to every Sunday. I didn't want pity. I didn't want advice. I just wanted to disappear for a while. But Angela didn't give up. She texted every few days. Updates. Apologies. "We miss you." She's calmed down. "Can we meet for coffee?" I didn't answer most of them. Then came the message that made my blood run cold. She's been seeing her dad again. Lacey's father, Ryan, hadn't been around much in the 2 years I'd been with Angela. From what I knew, he was the charming kind of irresponsible. The type who made big promises, then vanished when real life got hard. But Lacey adored him. Even when he bailed on her birthday. Even when he forgot to pick her up from the airport that one time. She still lit up whenever he resurfaced. Apparently, he'd resurfaced. Angela told me Lacey had reached out to him, told him she wanted to reconnect, that she felt smothered at home, that things had been better before Owen. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed, not just in her, in Angela, because instead of setting boundaries, instead of reminding her daughter what disrespect looked like, she let him back in. She wants to spend the weekend at his place, Angela said over the phone. I'm not thrilled about it, but I can't say no. Not now. I stayed silent. She's blaming me too now, she added. She thinks I let you leave because I chose you over her. I didn't. I didn't know how to fix it. And there it was. The thing I'd felt but never quite had the words for. Angela didn't choose anyone. She just stood still while everything fell apart around her. A week later, I got an email. It was from Lacey. It said, "You're not the victim here. You knew what you were doing the whole time. You came into our lives and acted like you were doing us a favor. But all you did was tear things apart. You're pathetic." No greeting. No signature. Just those 3 sentences. I sat with that message open for 10 full minutes, reading it over and over, trying to decide if it was bait, or a cry for help, or just truth. In the end, I didn't reply. I didn't even delete it. But I saved it, because something inside me had started to shift. The anger that had been buried beneath all that patience, it was starting to grow teeth. And I wasn't planning on biting back yet. Not yet. But I was done playing the ghost. It was the end of September when everything changed. I'd been gone just over 6 weeks, living out of that motel, and slowly starting to put the pieces of my life back together. I found a small rental on the edge of town, a fixer-upper, the kind of place I could lose myself in with a hammer and paintbrush. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Quiet. Undisturbed. Safe. Angela hadn't reached out in a while. Her texts had gone from frequent to polite, then faded into silence. I figured it was for the best. Maybe she was letting go. Maybe Lacey had finally gotten what she wanted, a clean break. But then came the voicemail. Not from Angela. From my bank. "Hi, Mr. McAllister. This is Dan from First River. Just calling to confirm a transfer that was initiated this morning. It's a bit unusual, flagged for review due to the amount and the linked external account. Wanted to make sure you authorized it. Give us a call back when you can." I frowned. I hadn't touched that account in weeks. It was the shared fund Angela and I had opened back when we were planning on buying a house together. Just a savings buffer, something we both contributed to monthly. We'd used it for the fence, some appliance repairs, and groceries now and then. There was a little over $14,000 in it when I last checked. I called the bank. The transfer was for $10,000 to an account under Ryan Hayes. Ryan, Lacey's dad. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't authorize that. Dan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, sir, it was initiated using your credentials. Your name. From a recognized device. Unless we can prove fraud, it may be difficult to reverse." I couldn't breathe. I thanked him and hung up. My hands were shaking. I drove straight to Angela's. I hadn't been back to that house since the night I left. It felt surreal pulling into the driveway, my spot in front of the garage now taken by a rusted-out pickup I didn't recognize. I knocked, firm and fast. Angela opened the door, looking startled. She was wearing old sweatpants, her hair pulled back, eyes puffy like she'd just woken from a nap. But the second she saw me, her expression shifted. "Owen," she breathed. "You're here. Where's Ryan?" That stunned her. She blinked. "What?" "I know about the transfer," I said. $10,000. From our joint account. To him. Her face went pale. "I didn't approve that," I continued. "But it was sent using my information. So either you gave it to him, or someone else did." Angela stepped back, biting her lip. "I was going to tell you." "Then say it now." She looked down at the floor. Lacey needed help. I blinked. "What?" "She wanted to go live with Ryan full-time. She said she couldn't be in this house anymore, that it was too painful with you gone. And Ryan, he said he couldn't take her unless he had money for a better place, a car that could make the school runs. He said he'd only do it if we could help. My voice cracked. "Angela, that was our house fund. Our future. You let him take 10 grand to play dad for a weekend. He promised." "He promised?" "You believed him." Angela's eyes were wet now. I just wanted to make things right with her. My stomach turned. "You let him in. After everything. And you let her use me to do it. She's my daughter. I was your partner." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. I saw it on her face. The guilt. The shame. but also the hesitation. The way she couldn't quite look me in the eye. Because the truth was, some part of her knew. She'd known what she was doing when she signed off on it. Maybe she even convinced herself it was temporary, that I wouldn't find out, or that I'd understand. But I didn't. And I wouldn't. I turned to leave. She called after me, voice breaking. Please don't walk away like this again. I paused at the door, one hand on the frame. Lacey didn't just get what she wanted, I said without turning around. She learned that all she has to do is break things to get her way. And you taught her that. Then I left. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. And I already knew what I was going to do next. I didn't go home after that. I didn't even go back to the rental. I just drove. Miles blurred past in silence. No radio. No thoughts I could make sense of. Just the sound of tires on pavement and this tight, sour feeling in my gut, like I'd swallowed something sharp and it was slowly cutting its way through me. I pulled off at some empty rest stop outside of town and parked beneath a flickering streetlight. Sat there until the sun started to rise behind a wall of trees, watching the sky turn from black to gray like a bruise healing in reverse. That morning I called out of work for the first time in 2 years. Told my boss I was sick, which was true, in a way. I didn't eat, didn't shower, just lay on the motel bed and stared at the ceiling. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe you, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes you feel like you're slowly disappearing. I couldn't even cry. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was numb. Angela and I weren't married. There was no legal bond to sever. No papers to file. But the weight of it, it felt heavier than any divorce could. We'd spent years building something. Slowly, carefully, like laying bricks one by one. I'd poured myself into that house, that life, into her daughter. And in the end, it was treated like a convenience store. Take what you want, leave nothing behind. The worst part? I let it happen. Every time I said nothing. Every time I gave the benefit of the doubt. Every time I swallowed my pride in the name of patience or love. I thought I was doing the right thing. But love without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. It took a few days before I forced myself to get up. I shaved, took a long, hot shower, changed the bedsheets. Then I drove to my new place and unlocked the front door for the first time in days. The air inside was stale. The kitchen counter still had paint swatches laid out from when I was trying to decide on colors. There was dust on the floor, dishes in the sink. It looked abandoned, like I'd left myself behind. That night, I sat at the table and pulled out my old planner. I flipped to an empty page and drew a single box at the top. October 1st. Then I started listing everything I wanted back. Not just money, not just peace. My sense of self, my direction, my spine. I'd been walking around like a ghost, watching people cross my boundaries, take what they wanted, and walk away without consequence. Not anymore. The first thing I did was call the bank again. I opened a fraud investigation, asked for every detail of the transaction. Device ID, IP address, location. I wasn't going to sit back and let it go. I didn't care if the odds were low. I wanted a paper trail, something to point to. Next, I closed the joint account permanently. Then I called an old friend of mine, Eric. Lawyer, semi-retired, used to be a shark before he burned out and started doing wills and business contracts instead. I told him the story, not just the money, but everything. From the beginning. The silence on the other end of the line lasted longer than I expected. Do you want revenge? He finally asked. No, I said. Not the petty kind. I just want to stop being the one who gets stepped on. He was quiet again, then said, I think it's time you stop playing defense. Eric helped me draft a formal letter. Nothing aggressive, just firm. I wanted Ryan to know I was aware, that the transfer was being looked into, that if the money wasn't returned voluntarily, legal options would be pursued. We didn't send it right away, just sat on it, like bait. The final piece came a few days later. I got a text from Lacey. Just 4 words. You ruined everything. Congrats. I stared at that message for a long time, and I realized something. Lacey didn't see me as a man or a person. She saw me as a tool, a wedge in her narrative. The villain in a story she'd rewritten in her head where her dad was the good guy, her mom was the victim, and I was the one who broke the family apart. That's when the switch flipped. Because suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't sitting in the ashes of some love story wondering what I could have done differently. I was awake, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. But first, I needed to see one more thing with my own eyes. A confirmation. A gut check. So I drove, one last time, to the house I used to call home. Parked across the street. Watched from behind tinted windows. The porch light was on. There were two cars in the driveway. One was Angela's. The other was Ryan's. And right there, on the front steps, I saw her. Lacey. Laughing. Smiling. Looking more content than she had in all the time I'd known her. That was all I needed. I turned the ignition. And as I drove away, I wasn't just leaving the house behind. I was leaving the version of myself they thought would never fight back. By the second week of October, things started to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, steady ways. The same way rain softens the ground before anything new can grow. I spent less time lying in bed staring at the ceiling and more time on my feet. I took on more jobs, long ones, satisfying ones. I started getting calls from clients I hadn't heard from in months. Word had spread that I was working again, and apparently absence really does make the heart grow fonder, or at least it makes people miss a reliable contractor. There was something therapeutic about demolition, breaking down old walls, tearing up cracked tiles, pulling out cabinets that had overstayed their welcome. I didn't say it out loud, but every swing of my sledgehammer felt like another thread snapping free from my past. One day, I completely gutted a kitchen while listening to a podcast about stoicism, and by the end of the job, I felt more whole than I had in years. And then, something unexpected happened. Eric called me. I sent the letter, he said without preamble. Certified mail. Tracked. Delivered yesterday morning. I didn't even have to ask who he meant. Ryan. And got a response. Eric said, a hint of amusement in his voice. A voicemail. From a very nervous man who claims this was all a misunderstanding. I couldn't help but smile. He offered to pay back the full amount. In installments, Eric continued. Says he never intended to cause any issues, and that he was told Owen was on board with everything. I scoffed. Told by who? There was a pause. You know who. Of course I did. I told Eric to move forward. If Ryan wanted to play nice, let him. I didn't need to drag things into court. I just wanted proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That what happened was real. And that I wasn't going to roll over this time. Meanwhile, I kept building. Not just homes, myself. I took that dusty rental of mine and started turning it into something worth keeping. New floors. New shelves. Repainted every room. I didn't go flashy. Didn't try to make it look like the life I'd had before. This wasn't about rebuilding what was lost. It was about building something better. I made a home. And one day, I came home from work and found a letter in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a check for $2,000. No note. No explanation. Just the check, written from an account under Ryan's name. The first installment. I didn't cash it. Not yet. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk and left it there. A reminder. A trophy. That week, I also got a call from a local contracting firm I'd done work for years ago. The owner was retiring and looking to sell the business. Licenses, equipment, client list and all. He offered me a deal so good I thought it was a scam at first. But it wasn't. He knew my reputation. Said he wanted someone with a clean name to take over. By November, I had my own company. Just a small crew. 3 guys I trusted and had worked with before. But it was mine. OM Renovations. The initials were just coincidence, but it felt symbolic. People started noticing. I wasn't some guy living in a motel anymore. I was the man who came back from nothing, quietly, steadily. The type who didn't complain, just built something better. Even my brother, who'd sensed something was wrong months ago but respected my silence, finally dropped by one weekend to help me tile the kitchen. We didn't talk about what happened, just worked side by side like we used to. It was one of the most healing days I'd had. That night, over burgers and beers, he said, I don't know what they took from you, but they clearly didn't take enough to stop you. I didn't reply, just raised my bottle. Because he was right. Angela texted again. Twice. The first message was simple. I heard about your company. Congratulations. You deserve it. I didn't reply. The second came a few days later. Lacey's been asking about you. She says she didn't mean everything she said. That she misses the calm you brought to the house. That one stayed unread. Because I'd learned something in the months since I left that house. You can miss someone and still know they're not good for you. And just because someone realizes what they lost doesn't mean they're entitled to get it back. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. But the final piece, the closure I didn't even know I wanted, was still coming. And when it arrived, it didn't knock. It screamed. It started with a whisper. A friend of mine, Marcus, a no-nonsense guy I'd worked alongside for years, came by my office one afternoon with a funny look on his face. He wasn't the gossip type, so when he knocked twice on the frame of my open door and said, "You're not gonna believe what I heard," I set my pen down immediately. "Shoot." He stepped in, shut the door behind him, and leaned on the back of the chair across from me. "You remember that guy who bought the Foreman house off of Elm Street?" I nodded. "The old Victorian that sat gutted for 2 years until a flipper finally took it." "Ryan." Marcus smirked. "Turns out he's running out of money. Badly. Word is he bit off more than he could chew. Tried to use his own labor to remodel the place, but didn't pull any permits. Got hit with fines. Delays. 2 contractors walked off the job mid-project. Now he's trying to sell it halfway finished." I leaned back, arms crossed, something simmering low in my gut. "You sure it's him?" "Name's on the filing. Hayes Remodeling, LLC. He even tried to contract one of our subs, Carlos. Offered him exposure instead of a paycheck." I laughed bitterly. That sounds about right. But it wasn't just schadenfreude. There was something else. A thought forming, half-formed, fragile, but growing. I waited until Marcus left. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up public property records. There it was, the address, the permit history, the contractor's name. He was drowning. And that's when I realized something. Ryan didn't just take my money. He used it to fund a project he never had the skill or capital to finish. That $10,000 was supposed to go toward a better place for Lacey, but in reality, he'd thrown it into a pit of bad planning and worse execution. And now he was bleeding. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. I didn't want to hurt him. Not directly. I wanted something better. I wanted him to watch me thrive in the space he thought he'd conquered. The next day, I called Eric. "Remember the letter we sent?" I asked. "Which one?" he asked dryly. "We've sent a few. The one to Ryan. Is there any clause or follow-up that gives us leverage if he misrepresented how the funds were being used?" Eric was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." "Why?" "Because I've got reason to believe he used that money not for his daughter, but to illegally fund a commercial renovation he wasn't licensed for." Eric whistled. "That's a serious charge." "I don't need a lawsuit," I said. "Not unless I have to. But if word got out, say, to the licensing board, the inspectors who flagged him, the potential buyer of that property, that he's not just incompetent, but dishonest, that could ruin him." Exactly. I didn't want to burn his house down. I just wanted to be the guy holding the extinguisher while he begged for water. So I did my research. Quietly, methodically. I gathered everything I could, scanned receipts, permit notices, contractor reviews, a few screenshots from construction forums where Ryan had posted under a username so close to his real name it might as well have been a billboard. He bragged about finessing the system, joked about letting inspectors walk into a wall and figure it out later. I packaged it all, tied it with a bow. Then came the opportunity one didn't expect. I was visiting a hardware supplier on the other side of town when I bumped into a realtor I vaguely knew from years ago, Jenna. We chatted for a bit, and she mentioned how the Foreman place was back on the market. "Off-market listing," she said. "Owner's desperate. Needs someone to take it off his hands." I smiled. "You don't say." 2 days later, I toured it. Just me and Jenna. The place was worse than I expected. Mold in the basement. Unfinished electrical work. Flooring stacked in piles, never installed. And the attic. Oh man, the attic was a code violation waiting to happen. I kept my mouth shut, walking room to room like I was impressed. Then Jenna said something that made me pause. "Seller's claiming he had a silent partner," she said. "Some guy who backed out after they started, left him in the lurch. I guess he was using the money to prep for his daughter moving in. Then the partner pulled the rug out from under him." I blinked. "A partner?" She shrugged. "That's what he told me. He was rewriting the story. Again, painting himself as the victim." That's when I knew. This wasn't just some greedy, washed-up dad trying to flip a house. This was personal. He was still using me, still framing me in his version of events. And now I had a chance to flip the script. I walked back to my truck, pulled out my phone, and texted Eric just 2 words. "Time's up." But first, I had one more visit to make. Someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Angela. Because what I was planning next. She needed to hear it from me, before the whole truth finally came crashing down around them. Angela opened the door slower than I'd ever seen her move. Her eyes were tired. Not the kind of tired from lack of sleep, The kind you carry when you're pretending everything's fine for too long. The porch behind her looked weathered, like no one had bothered to sweep it in weeks. Dead leaves clung to the corners. A small crack had formed in the banister I'd repaired myself 2 years ago. "Owen," she said, her voice unsure, almost wary. "This is unexpected." "I know," I said calmly. "I won't stay long." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "You want to come in?" I shook my head. "I just want to tell you something. Then I'll be gone." She pulled her cardigan tighter, crossing her arms. "Okay." I met her eyes. "You told me once you didn't want to lose either of us. That you were just trying to keep things from falling apart." Her gaze dropped. "I remember." "Well, they did," I said. "And now that the dust has settled, I want you to know something important. I don't hate you, Angela. I never did." She looked up again. I could see the storm behind her eyes. "But I'm done being quiet," I continued. "Your ex took money from me under false pretenses. And now, he's drowning in a house project he never had the skill or resources to finish. You probably knew that." Angela didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. "I gave him the chance to pay me back, quietly. He's been sending payments, small ones, pretending like that makes it right. But it's not about the money anymore. It's about the lies, the manipulation, and the fact that he used you and your daughter to do it." I pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket. Inside was a printed list of the public code violations and unpaid fines attached to Ryan's project. I handed it to her. "I'm reporting all of it. To the local licensing board, to the code enforcement office. And I'm also giving a full anonymous report to the buyer's agent Jenna introduced me to. He's been trying to dump the house with half-finished work and a doctored renovation record." Angela unfolded the paper with shaking hands. Her fingers went still halfway through. "You're serious," she said, almost whispering. "I gave him a way out," I replied. "He chose to lie again." She looked up at me. "And you came here to what? Gloat?" "No," I said gently. "I came to give you a warning. Because when this goes down, it's going to get ugly. And Lacey's going to be in the blast radius." Angela looked like she might cry. "She's not the same lately. She barely talks to me anymore. Ryan promised her a fresh start. He said he could give her something I never could." "Did he?" She didn't answer. I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Angela." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. 3 weeks later, the dominoes fell. Ryan's half-flipped Victorian officially tanked. The city sent him a formal notice of violation for 5 separate permit failures, including exposed wiring, mold remediation delays, and misreported materials costs. The licensing board opened an investigation into misappropriation of funds after receiving multiple anonymous tips, including notarized documentation of the original money transfer, all tied back to Ryan's personal statements about using it for family housing. Turns out the phrase, "I just needed it to finish a project," doesn't go over well when it's tied to a fraudulent business claim. Then came the bombshell. The potential buyer for the Foreman house, a high-profile real estate investor, pulled out of the deal the morning of the closing inspection. Why? Because an envelope full of documents had been left in their lawyer's inbox, detailing every corner Ryan had cut, every permit missed, every laborer unpaid, every silent partner lie. That envelope didn't have a return address, but it didn't need one. The buyer's agent called Jenna, fuming. She called Ryan. Ryan called Angela. And Angela? She called me. I didn't answer, but I saved the voicemail. Her voice trembled. "Owen, he's losing it. He said you destroyed his reputation, that you poisoned everything. He's blaming me now. And Lacey, he's saying we set him up, that you tricked him into taking the money just so you could ruin him. He's unraveling, and I don't know what to do anymore." The house sat on the market for 6 more weeks. Price slashed again and again. The fines stacked up. Contractors who'd walked off the job came forward with invoices and grievances. The city red-tagged the entire structure. Eventually, the house was seized by the bank. Ryan disappeared. Rumor was, he packed up and left the state. As for me, business boomed. People love a comeback story. Word spread fast about the man who was taken advantage of, but rose up and started his own company. The contractor who did clean work, who didn't cut corners, who didn't hide behind charm or excuses. I started hiring more crew, picked up bigger contracts, even got a feature in a local magazine about small business success. And one crisp December morning, I found an envelope on my porch. No stamp, just my name on the front in familiar, slightly messy handwriting. Inside was a note. I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't know he was using you. I thought I was defending my family. I'm sorry. Underneath it was the original check. The one Ryan sent me, still uncashed, and scrawled in the corner in blue ink were 2 words. Keep it. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not out of victory, not out of spite, but because the silence, finally, was mine. The fallout came fast, like a storm nobody saw until the sky cracked open. After the house was foreclosed, Ryan tried to file for bankruptcy, but the paperwork stalled when the licensing board issued a formal inquiry into his remodeling business. Turns out he never should have been operating under that LLC to begin with. It was expired, unrenewed, and never insured. That opened the door for an avalanche of legal consequences. 3 unpaid contractors banded together to file a civil claim. One of them had injuries from a fall due to an unfinished stair install Ryan never reported. The court ordered a lien against anything Ryan still owned, which wasn't much. His truck was repossessed, his tools auctioned off, his name blacklisted from almost every reputable real estate and construction group in the county. Last I heard, he was living out of a rented basement suite 2 states away, doing odd jobs for cash. Still blaming everyone but himself. Angela stayed quiet through it all. After that last voicemail, she never reached out again. I suspect she knew that any apology now would be too little, too late. That letting it all happen, the lies, the manipulation, the transfer, had cost her more than just a relationship. It had cost her my respect. But it was Lacey who surprised me. Mid-January, I was cleaning up my job site when a small envelope arrived at the office. Inside was a photo, an old one I'd completely forgotten about. It was taken during a camping trip we'd done the first summer I lived with them. Just the 3 of us by the lake. I had my arm around Angela, and Lacey, begrudging but smiling, was holding up a marshmallow on a stick. On the back of the photo, in small, neat handwriting, were 5 words. I didn't know. I'm sorry. That was it. No name. No request to talk. Just a memory and the weight of realization behind it. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about reopening old doors. It was about closing them with grace. That spring, I bought my first investment property, a modest 2-bedroom fixer in a quiet neighborhood, not far from where it all began. I renovated it with my crew, took my time, gave it everything I'd learned, about foundations, about boundaries, about how much you can carry before you finally say enough. I flipped the house 3 months later. The profit? Exactly $10,000. The same amount they took from me. But this time, it didn't feel like a recovery. It felt like a clean slate. A second life, earned the hard way. And as I stood on the porch of that freshly painted house, the sold signs swinging gently in the breeze, I let the weight of the last year fall from my shoulders and said goodbye to the ghosts still haunting the house I never should have called home. Because in the end, they didn't ruin me. They revealed me. And I'll never be quiet again. I'm Craig, 29 years old, the family disappointment. That's not an exaggeration. It's what my dad actually called me one Thanksgiving, right after asking me to pass the gravy. He said it like it was a joke, but the smirk on his face told me it wasn't. My mom laughed along, my brother grinned, and I sat there pretending it didn't sting. I've been pretending for a long time. In my family, success had a very specific shape. My dad ran a financial firm. My mom was the kind of woman who judged people by the car they drove, and my older brother, Jason, was the golden boy who fit their mold perfectly. He got the $100,000 car for his 21st birthday, a glossy white BMW that my dad surprised him with in the driveway while I filmed the whole thing because, Craig, you're good with phones. I was 19, working 2 part-time jobs, and driving a dented Civic with 1 working window. When I congratulated Jason, he threw his arm around me and said, "Don't worry, little bro. Maybe one day you'll get there." He meant it kindly, I think, but it still landed like a slap. Jason got everything. A fully paid condo downtown, a cushy job at dad's firm right after college, a $5,000 watch for graduation. Me? I didn't even get invited to the dinner they threw for him. Mom said it was more of a business networking thing, and that I probably wouldn't fit in. That was the story of my life. Never fitting in, always standing just outside the frame. What made it worse was how subtle the digs became as I got older. When I dropped out of college to start my own business, they called it a phase. When that business failed, Dad sent me an article titled, "Why Most Startups Collapse Within 2 Years" with the caption, Interesting read. Mom told people I was still figuring things out, which was her polite way of saying unemployed. At family gatherings, Jason would make these little comments like, "Hey Craig, how's that next big idea coming along?" followed by his girlfriend's giggle and a pitying glance from Mom. I learned to laugh it off, because arguing never helped. It only confirmed their version of me. Bitter, sensitive, unsuccessful. Still, I kept trying. Quietly. While Jason posted photos from corporate retreats in Hawaii, I was coding in my apartment at 2 a.m. When Dad called to tell me I should come work for him for a few years and learn something real, I politely declined. He said, "Suit yourself," and hung up. I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Not even anger, just that quiet, condescending pity. That hurt more than yelling ever could. The turning point started a few months before the Thanksgiving dinner that would change everything. I had been working on a small tech platform. Nothing fancy at first, just a tool to automate customer data for local businesses. It grew faster than I expected. Suddenly, investors were calling. I didn't tell my family. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew exactly how it would go. They'd either mock it or, worse, act supportive while waiting for it to fail. I wanted to build something on my own terms, something real, without the constant shadow of my dad's firm or Jason's perfect resume hovering over me. By that point, I had stopped showing up for most family events. The few I did attend were more out of guilt than desire. But that year, Mom insisted I come home for Thanksgiving. "It's been too long," she said. "Your brother's bringing his new girlfriend, and everyone's excited to see you." The way she said "everyone" sounded rehearsed. I almost said no, but a small part of me, the part that still hoped maybe they'd finally treat me like more than a disappointment, said yes. The dinner was held at a country club, because of course it was. The kind of place where the napkins were folded like swans and the waiters wore white gloves. I arrived early, wearing the only blazer I owned, a little wrinkled from sitting in my car. When I walked in, I saw my family already seated at a long table. Jason waved, grinning. "Look who decided to show up. The prodigal son returns." Everyone laughed. I smiled and sat down. I told myself I wouldn't let it get to me. Not tonight. But it didn't take long for the old routine to start. Dad asking Jason about quarterly performance. Mom complimenting his girlfriend's elegant taste. Then a casual, "So Craig, what are you doing these days?" I kept it simple. "Still working on a few tech projects." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Tech projects," he repeated, like it was a foreign word. "So, no real job yet." Jason laughed softly. "Hey, he's an entrepreneur, Dad. That's what they call it now when you don't have a paycheck." Everyone chuckled. I felt the old burn in my chest, but I forced a smile. "Something like that," I said. Mom patted my hand gently, like she was comforting a child. "We're proud of you for trying, dear. Not everyone's meant to take the easy route." The dinner went on, full of little jabs disguised as humor. When the wine started flowing, the comments got looser. Jason told a story about how Dad had taught him everything about business and how some people just aren't wired for success. Then came the toast, the moment that stuck in my mind long after that night. Jason stood, glass raised high, his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Here's to family," he said. "And to my brother, Craig. Maybe someday you'll catch up." Laughter rippled around the table. My hand tightened around my glass, but I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, at all of them, and smiled. A real smile this time, though they didn't know why. Because 15 minutes later, as dessert was being served, the giant TV above the bar flickered. The sports channel cut to breaking news, local business headlines. "Tech startup acquired for $40 million, the anchor said, founded by local man Craig Lawson. I didn't even hear the rest. The room seemed to slow down. My dad froze mid-sip. My mom's smile faltered. Jason turned toward the screen, his face draining of color. Then he looked back at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wait, that's your company." And that was the moment everything shifted, not just in the room, but in my life. But before I could answer, before I could even process the expression on his face, Dad's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and his expression turned unreadable. That was when I knew something bigger was coming. The silence after that headline was the kind that fills every inch of a room and still manages to press against your ribs. Jason's hand hovered midair, holding his wine glass like he'd forgotten what it was for. My mom blinked at the TV, her jaw tight, and my dad's phone buzzed again, this time louder, vibrating against the tablecloth. I just sat there, staring at my untouched dessert, pretending to read the little chocolate tag that said Happy Thanksgiving from Stonebrook Country Club. Dad was the first to speak. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, his voice stiff, "I suppose that explains why you've been so busy." He laughed, but it sounded dry, like a bark that didn't belong to him. Mom finally found her voice. "Craig, why didn't you tell us?" Her tone wasn't proud or amazed. It was sharp, almost accusing. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to find out from a television?" I shrugged lightly. "You never asked." Jason's girlfriend, Emma, blinked between us. "Wait," she said, pointing at the TV that was still looping the headline. "You're that Craig Lawson? The one who founded Circutech?" I nodded once. Jason still hadn't said anything. He was staring at me like he'd just realized I was speaking an entirely new language. "You built that," he finally muttered. "I thought you were still, freelancing or something." "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It started small. Took a few years, but it worked out." Dad leaned back, his eyes narrow. "Worked out," he repeated, almost mocking. "So you made a deal behind our backs and didn't think your family deserved to know?" That stung. "It wasn't behind anyone's back," I said. "I just didn't think it mattered to you. You've all made it pretty clear I'm the black sheep." Mom gasped quietly, hand to her chest. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Craig. You've always taken things so personally." Jason finally found his footing. "This is unreal," he said, shaking his head with a small laugh. "So what now, huh? You're the big shot? You going to rub it in our faces?" I looked at him, at that smug half-smile trying to mask whatever panic was bubbling underneath. "No," I said. "I was just here for dinner." But even as I said it, I could feel the room shift again. People at nearby tables were whispering. Someone even clapped me on the shoulder, congratulating me. Jason's expression hardened. Dad didn't like attention that wasn't directed at him, and Jason had inherited that same fragile pride. After that, the night became something else entirely. The table split into two worlds, Mom, Dad, and Jason on one side, tight-lipped and cold. Me on the other, trying to disappear into the linen napkin. They didn't even finish dessert. Dad signaled for the check early, muttering something about needing to discuss things privately. When we stepped outside, the chill hit like a wall. Dad turned to me by the valet stand. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said firmly. "At my office. 10 sharp." I nodded, though I had no idea why I was agreeing. Jason just scoffed. "Can't wait to see how this goes," he muttered before getting into his car. That was the last thing anyone said to me that night. The next morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls, 12 from Dad, 8 from Mom, 3 from Jason. My phone buzzed again before I could even process it. "Dad," I answered. "Where are you?" His voice was clipped. "Home," I said. "You told me 10. It's 9:30. Come now. We need to clear the air." When I arrived at the office, his assistant looked at me like I was a stranger trespassing. She handed me a visitor badge, something she'd never given Jason in his life, and directed me to the conference room. Dad was already inside, seated at the head of the table, papers spread in front of him. "Sit," he said. I sat. He leaned back, studying me for a long moment. "You blindsided us, Craig. You realize that, don't you?" "I didn't think I owed anyone an announcement," I said carefully. His jaw twitched. "You're still part of this family. Whether you like it or not, what you do reflects on us. People are calling. Clients, colleagues, friends, asking why we didn't mention we had a son in tech. Do you know how that makes me look?" That word, look, summed him up perfectly. My father cared more about appearances than truth. Always had. "I didn't build the company for appearances," I said. "It's not about you." His eyes went cold. "Everything you do is about me. You carry my name, my reputation. You wouldn't even have the brains for that company if I hadn't paid for your education." I bit back a response. I'd paid my student loans myself after dropping out. He'd cut me off the second I left college. But arguing that now would just prove his point. In his mind, I was still the ungrateful kid. He slid a folder across the table. "I spoke to some people," he said. "We could bring you under the firm's umbrella, merge your work with ours. It would make sense. We can position it as a family success story." I stared at the folder. "You want to take credit?" I said flatly. He frowned. "Don't be childish. It's business. You could use guidance managing that kind of money. Let us help." By us, he meant him. I stood slowly. "Thanks, but I'm good on my own." His voice sharpened. Don't be foolish, Craig. I can help you avoid the kind of mistakes you're known for. I froze. Mistakes? He sighed like he pitied me. Your track record isn't exactly spotless. You've had failures. You lack discipline. Jason's got the right mindset. He could be a real asset to your company. There it was. The pitch. You want Jason involved? I said. I want this family united. He corrected, which meant the same thing. I left before I said something I'd regret. That night, Mom called. Her voice was sugar over vinegar. Honey, your father just wants what's best. He's worried you're in over your head. I'm fine, Mom. I know, sweetie, but 40 million is a lot to handle. Maybe talk to Jason. He's got experience with these things. I laughed quietly. You mean Dad handles everything for him? She sighed. Craig, you always assume the worst. But I wasn't assuming. I'd lived it. Every time Jason stumbled, Dad cleaned it up. When Jason lost $60,000 in bad investments, Dad called it a learning opportunity. When I missed one rent payment years ago, Dad called it proof you're not responsible. For the next week, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Jason sent me a long text about joining forces and doing something big together. I ignored it. Then came the dinner invite from Mom, just to talk things through. Against my better judgment, I went. Dinner was at their house, the same one filled with pictures of Jason's graduation, Jason's awards, Jason shaking hands with Dad's business partners. There was exactly one photo of me, shoved on a side table, half cropped out of a family shot. Jason greeted me with a wide smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey man, look at you, Mr. Big Deal. He clapped my shoulder a little too hard. Hey, I said, sitting down. Dad didn't waste time. Your brother's got a proposal, he said. Jason leaned forward. So here's the idea. You've got the tech. I've got the connections. We can scale this thing tenfold. I bring in clients, investors, infrastructure. You handle the product. Equal partners. I blinked. Equal. He nodded earnestly. 50-50. Dad nodded approvingly, like it was already decided. It's a win-win. You get stability, he gets exposure. Everyone benefits. I stared at both of them. You realize my company was just acquired. There's no partnership to offer. Jason smirked. Come on, man. Don't play coy. You'll start another one, right? You've got talent. And we can back you this time, properly. Mom placed her hand on mine. Craig, think about it. Families should help each other. I looked at their faces, hopeful, expectant, greedy. It wasn't about family. It was about control. They couldn't stand that I'd done something without them. I stood. Thanks for dinner, I said. Mom's smile faltered. Craig, I'm glad you're proud, I said, but I don't need managing partners, or mentors, or help. Dad's voice hardened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, grabbing my coat. But it'll be my mistake. I left before they could stop me. That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Over the next few days, Dad started calling people he knew in tech and finance circles, checking in, offering advice, clarifying details. It didn't take long before a few of my old contacts told me he'd been introducing himself as a key backer of my company. When I confronted him, he brushed it off. I'm just helping establish credibility, he said. Then Jason posted on LinkedIn a long, self-congratulatory post about learning from family success stories. It included a picture of us at Thanksgiving and a caption that read, "Proud of my brother for carrying the Lawson name into tech innovation. Excited for what's next together." We weren't working together, not even close, but he was already telling people we were. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to share the spotlight. They were trying to take it, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. But before I could act, something happened that changed everything. Something that showed me just how far they were willing to go to drag me back under their control. The betrayal didn't come as a sudden explosion. It came like a slow leak, quiet at first, almost invisible. But by the time I noticed, the damage was already spreading. It started with an email I wasn't supposed to see. I was sitting in a small cafe downtown, laptop open, headphones on, working through a round of post-acquisition logistics for my company when I got a message from my bank. At first, I thought it was a standard verification alert, but then I saw the subject line, "Request for account authorization, pending approval." The request came from Lawson Financial Group, my father's firm. They'd submitted a request to gain temporary financial oversight on my business accounts under the pretense of family trust management. It was flagged as suspicious because, obviously, I hadn't authorized anything. I froze. My coffee went cold while I reread the message 5 times, hoping I was misunderstanding it. I wasn't. The document attached even had my father's digital signature and a note that said, Craig Lawson, beneficiary. Oversight under Family Fiduciary Authority. Beneficiary. The word made my stomach turn. They were trying to legally classify my company earnings under the Lawson Family Trust, the one I'd been excluded from years ago. It wasn't just overreach. It was a full-on attempt to seize control. I called my father immediately. He picked up on the second ring, his tone as calm as ever. Craig, good timing. I was about to call you. What is this? I asked, my voice shaking. You tried to access my business accounts? He sighed, like I was overreacting. You're misinterpreting things. It's a standard oversight process. We're trying to help you manage your assets responsibly. I didn't ask for help. Craig, he said sharply, $40 million isn't a toy. You're young, impulsive, and inexperienced. If you make one bad investment, it all disappears. We're just protecting what's ours. What's yours? I repeated slowly. He hesitated for just half a second, enough to tell me he knew what he'd said. You're part of this family, he said finally. That means you represent the Lawson legacy. The company's success reflects on us. It doesn't belong to you, I said. You wouldn't even be here without us. That was it. I hung up before I said something that would burn every bridge left. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, weird things started happening. My accountant called, confused, asking why there were duplicate inquiries on my tax documents. My lawyer mentioned that someone had tried to request information about my non-disclosure agreements from the acquisition firm. Someone else, anonymous, had even contacted one of the venture capital groups I'd worked with, asking if I'd ever mishandled funds. The pattern was obvious. My father and brother were trying to dig their way in through back channels, probably hoping to find something they could use as leverage. It all came to a head a week later, when I got invited to what I thought was a networking brunch at a hotel downtown. The email looked legitimate, signed by one of Dad's old business acquaintances, a man named Richard Bennett. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I should have trusted my gut. When I arrived, I spotted them immediately, Dad, Mom, Jason, and Richard, all seated at a private table in the corner. The moment I saw my father's expression, that smug half-smile, I knew I'd walked into a setup. Craig, Dad said, standing to greet me like this was some family reunion. Glad you could make it. What's going on? I asked, scanning their faces. Sit down, son, he said. We need to clear the air. Richard smiled politely, but he looked uncomfortable. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking. Mom reached for my hand. Please, Craig, just listen. Dad started with a speech that sounded rehearsed. We all made mistakes in how this was handled, but we have an opportunity to set things right, to work as a family. Richard here has been advising us on how to structure a joint trust. You'd maintain control over your company earnings, of course, but under family oversight. It's cleaner that way. I felt my pulse spike. You mean you'd control it? Dad shook his head, smiling thinly. Not control, guide. You'd still be the face of it. Jason would just manage the financial aspects. He's good at that. Jason grinned. It's just numbers, bro. You focus on the tech. I'll handle the boring stuff. I looked at Richard. And you're helping them with this? He shifted uncomfortably. Your father presented it as a family consensus. I assumed you were aware. My voice dropped. I wasn't. Dad's tone hardened. Don't be naive, Craig. You're in over your head. You don't understand how these things work. Mom chimed in softly. Honey, your father's just trying to protect you. You've always been so independent, but independence doesn't mean isolation. Jason chuckled under his breath. Yeah, man. Don't make this harder than it has to be. That's when something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that I felt it in my bones. I stood up slowly. You really think you can just take what I built because it makes you uncomfortable that it's mine? Dad's face tightened. Watch your tone. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. For once, you watch yours. The air went heavy. Mom looked like she might cry. Jason rolled his eyes. I'm not signing anything, I said. And if you try to touch my accounts again, I'll make it public. Dad scoffed. Don't threaten me, boy. You wouldn't dare embarrass this family. Maybe you're right, I said. Maybe I won't have to. I left. But even as I walked out, I could feel Jason's glare on my back, like a warning. That night, the real betrayal hit. I was at home, half asleep, when my phone exploded with notifications. Dozens of messages, emails, and calls. My business Slack was going crazy. A client had posted on social media, tagging me directly. Disappointed to learn about the internal misconduct at Circutech. Hope this isn't true, Craig. My stomach dropped. I opened my laptop and saw it. A leaked document thread online, supposedly exposing how I'd falsified company data before the acquisition. The files were doctored, but they looked real. Internal memos, spreadsheets, even fake email chains. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. My phone buzzed again. It was my head of operations, Maya, calling in a panic. Craig, what's going on? Investors are asking for statements. I don't know, I said, already pulling up the documents. But someone's trying to take us down. Within an hour, I traced the first leak to an IP address, one linked to Lawson Financial Group. I sat there in my dark apartment, staring at the glow of the screen, feeling the kind of cold that comes from betrayal you can't quite process yet. My own family had sabotaged me, not just embarrassed me, tried to destroy everything I built. I confronted them the next morning, walked straight into my father's office without knocking. He didn't even look surprised. You went too far, I said. He looked up from his desk, unbothered. Careful what you accuse people of. You leaked fake documents. You tried to ruin me. I protected our name, he said flatly. People talk, Craig. They ask questions. You're not prepared for that kind of scrutiny. I simply redirected the narrative. Jason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Relax, man. No one believes that stuff. Then why do it? I demanded. He smirked. Because you needed a reminder. You don't get to cut us out. Not after everything we've done for you. Everything they'd done for me. The irony burned. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just looked at both of them and said, You've made a mistake you can't undo. Dad's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? No, I said, my voice calm. It's a promise. I walked out without another word. But later that week, something else happened, something that made my father's betrayal look almost small in comparison. A letter arrived at my door. No name, no return address. Inside was a printed email thread between Jason and one of my acquisition partners. The message was short but devastating. Hey, appreciate your time earlier. Just to confirm, the offer still stands. We'd be willing to negotiate directly if Craig steps back. Family would make a much better public face for Circutech. We can handle the optics quietly. It was signed, Jason Lawson. That was the moment the last bit of doubt left me. They weren't just trying to share my success. They wanted to take it. And if they thought I'd just let that happen, they hadn't learned a thing about me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The letter sat on my desk like a quiet confession. Those printed words burned into my brain. Family would make a much better public face for Circutech. Jason's name at the bottom looked almost smug on the page, as if he'd signed it with pride. I must have reread it 50 times, each time feeling another part of me crack. My brother. The same brother I'd once shared bunk beds with. The same brother who'd promised, when we were kids, that we'd always have each other's backs. He'd sold me out, not for survival, not even for necessity, but for the spotlight. By morning, my phone was a battlefield. Investors were jittery, partners were confused, and the acquisition team had suspended all press communications until they resolved internal inconsistencies. I was suddenly radioactive. The story my father's firm had helped circulate, that I'd faked data, had spread further than I realized. Even though it was false, the doubt was enough to make people hesitate. And that's all it takes in business. One pause, one whisper, one rumor. Maya called again around noon. Her voice was shaky but calm. Craig, I just came from a meeting with the PR firm. They said your father's office called them, offering to handle crisis management for Circutech, under the family name. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Of course they did. She hesitated. Are you okay? I stared at the wall. Not really. After we hung up, I just sat there, blinds half closed, sunlight cutting across my desk, my laptop humming quietly. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than shouting. I'd built my company from nothing, fought through years of failure, loneliness, doubt. But I'd never expected the final blow to come from my own blood. Over the next week, things spiraled faster. My acquisition deal was put on temporary review. Some investors pulled out. Clients began pausing projects. The media had latched onto the drama like vultures. Headlines read, "Family feud at the heart of $40 million tech deal. and Lawson dynasty rift spills into business world. Every time I opened my phone, I saw Jason's face, smiling in photos, being quoted as a close family advisor. He was giving interviews, spinning a version of events that made me look reckless and impulsive. "Craig's brilliant," he'd say, "but creative minds sometimes need grounding. We're just trying to guide him." He was painting me as a genius in need of supervision, not independent, but unstable. Mom called every night, alternating between guilt and manipulation. "Honey, please, just talk to your brother. He didn't mean to hurt you. He forged my name on documents, Mom. Your father said it was just a misunderstanding. You know how paperwork can get. Paperwork doesn't send fake emails to investors," I said quietly. She sighed, her tone softening. "You've always been so sensitive. This isn't worth losing your family over." But that was the thing. I hadn't lost my family. They'd lost me. Then came the lowest blow. I was walking to my car one evening after a long day of damage control when I noticed a reporter waiting by the curb. He looked nervous, almost sympathetic. "Mr. Lawson," he said, holding out his phone like it might bite him. "Off the record, you should know your brother's firm is preparing a statement. Something about reclaiming oversight of your assets due to mental health concerns." I froze. "What did you just say?" He swallowed. "They're implying you're not fit to manage your company post-sale. That the stress has caused instability." For a second, I thought he was joking, but his expression was dead serious. By the time I got home, it was already out. The statement wasn't directly from my family. It was anonymous sources close to Lawson Financial Group. But it was clear who had written it. It claimed that I had been under significant strain, that my erratic decisions had raised questions about my capacity to manage long-term business affairs. It was calculated, designed not to destroy me outright, but to make people second-guess me. That's worse. The next day, the acquisition company froze the final payment transfer pending an independent review. I suddenly had millions locked behind bureaucracy and no access to most of it. The irony? The only people I could technically appeal through the chain of authority were part of the same old boys network my father ran. Jason even had the nerve to call me. "Hey man," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You should have just worked with us. None of this would have happened. You forged my name, spread lies, and now you're questioning my sanity." I said quietly. "You think this is just business?" He sighed. "You always make things emotional. Look, Dad's right. You need structure. You're not built for this kind of pressure." Something inside me cracked then, but not in the way they wanted. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "Thanks for the clarity," and hung up. That was the moment I hit rock bottom. Not because I'd lost money or status, but because I finally accepted that there was nothing left to save between us. The illusion of family was dead. I disappeared for a while after that. Stopped answering calls. Stopped showing up to meetings. I rented a small cabin 2 hours outside the city. No Wi-Fi, no reporters, no noise. Just me, my laptop, and the weight of everything I'd built slipping through my fingers. The first few days were numb. I'd wake up late, stare at the ceiling, make coffee, and sit on the porch watching the same pair of birds hop along the fence. There was something calming about the stillness, even if it felt undeserved. But beneath that quiet, something else was forming. Not anger, not revenge yet, but focus. The kind that comes when there's nothing left to lose. I started piecing things together, mapping out every move my father and Jason had made, who they'd contacted, what strings they'd pulled, where the fake documents had originated. I still had connections in tech and cybersecurity, people who owed me favors. I reached out, quietly, under the radar. One night, while going through encrypted email logs, I found something. A clue I hadn't noticed before. The forged oversight documents that had been submitted to the bank. They hadn't come directly from Lawson Financial Group servers. They'd been routed through a smaller shell company, recently incorporated under a different name. The owner? A consultant who'd once worked for my father's firm. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. They'd built a front, a legal buffer to distance themselves from what they were doing, and they thought I'd never find it. The next morning, I drove back into the city. My first stop was my lawyer's office. He'd been handling my side quietly, but even he looked uneasy. "Craig," he said, "I need to be honest with you. Your father's influence is substantial. If we push too hard publicly, this could get ugly fast." "I'm not scared of ugly," I said. I just want the truth. He nodded slowly. Then you'll need proof. Real proof. I'll get it. Over the next few weeks, I worked in silence. No social media, no public statements. I let them think they'd broken me. Meanwhile, I was collecting digital fingerprints, tracing money transfers, building a trail of evidence so clean it could cut glass. But it wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, my autonomy, my dignity. One night, I was in that same cabin, surrounded by printouts, when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have gone digging, Craig. Some things are better left buried. No signature. But I didn't need one. I looked at the screen for a long time, then turned it off and set it face down on the table. For the first time in months, I felt something sharp in my chest. Not fear, but resolve. Because now, it wasn't just business. It was war. And the people who'd once called me the family disappointment had no idea how much damage disappointment could do once it stopped caring about their approval. It's funny how rock bottom sharpens you. When you've lost everything, reputation, trust, family, what's left is clarity. Cold, ruthless clarity. I didn't rush my comeback. I wanted it to burn slow, quiet, deliberate, the way a fuse crawls before it reaches the dynamite. The first thing I did was rebuild my footing. I didn't try to fight the headlines or argue online. I'd learned something from watching my father operate. People forget noise, but remember proof. So I started with what I could control. I called Maya. She sounded hesitant at first, probably wondering if I was about to announce I was quitting. Craig, it's been weeks. How are you? I'm fine, I said, though that was a stretch. Listen, I need your help with something. Off the record. There was a pause. Then, I'm listening. Over the next hour, I laid everything out. The fake financial oversight requests, the shell company tied to my father, the leaked emails, Jason's attempt to negotiate behind my back. I didn't tell her about the anonymous text. Not yet. Maya was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that stuck with me. They made one mistake. What's that? They underestimated you. That single line flipped a switch in me. We started small, reclaiming control over what they'd taken. Maya reached out to key clients, one by one, under the radar, assuring them the allegations were being investigated. I hired an independent auditor to verify every shred of Circuiteca's financial history. Within a week, the auditor's report came back. Everything was clean. No data manipulation. No fraud. Nothing but excellence. That gave us leverage, not enough to restore the acquisition yet, but enough to plant doubt about my father's concerns. Next, I met with an old friend, Tomas, a cybersecurity expert I'd helped years ago when his startup almost collapsed. He owed me one. When I told him about the forged documents and the shell company, he grinned. You want me to find who really did it? I want you to make it undeniable. For 2 weeks, Tomas dug into digital mud. Every night, he'd send me updates. IP traces, VPN logs, server timestamps, the works. It was a ghost hunt, until one night he called me, excitement in his voice. Got something. You're gonna like this. He'd traced the origin of the forged documents to a laptop registered under Lawson Financial's network, specifically Jason's credentials. But here's where it got interesting. The files were uploaded from a remote connection during business hours when Jason was supposedly off-site meeting clients. Meaning, he tried to cover his tracks by bouncing through the firm's proxy, but Tomas had pieced it back together. It was enough. Not to take them down yet, but enough to start planning how. Meanwhile, something else started to happen. The narrative began shifting. A tech journalist who'd covered my acquisition months earlier reached out privately. I've heard whispers about what your family's been doing. If you're ready to talk, I'll listen. I didn't respond right away. Timing mattered. I wanted all the dominoes in place first. Then came the call I'd been waiting for, from the acquisition company's legal division. Mr. Lawson, the attorney said, the review is complete. Your name has been cleared. We'll proceed with the final disbursement this week. I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. But when I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, just breathing. That was the first real victory. Not just for me, but against them. But I wasn't done. Once the funds were released, I made a few quiet moves. I opened a new holding company under a different name, Laro Group. No ties to the Lawson family. No familiar executives. I transferred assets, patents, and rights connected to my upcoming projects there. It was airtight, legal, and invisible. Then I started my next venture. I called it NodeTrack, an AI platform that automated back-end infrastructure for startups. It was exactly what I wished I'd had when I was building Circuitech. Within 3 months, early investors were lining up. Within 6, it was already valued at $10 million, privately. I made sure no public filings mentioned my last name. While I was rebuilding, Jason was busy imploding. His guidance narrative was losing traction. Without my silence to fuel it, the press started digging. A few journalists noticed discrepancies in his story, conflicting timelines, self-contradicting claims. Then one outlet published a piece highlighting possible misconduct within Lawson Financial's PR outreach related to my defamation. I didn't even have to do anything. Their own arrogance was eating them alive. Still, I wanted more than vindication. I wanted distance. So I moved, sold my apartment, and bought a penthouse downtown under Laro Group. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, silence that felt earned, not empty. I poured myself into NodeTrack, working late nights, refining systems, mentoring new developers. I found purpose again, not in proving anyone wrong, but in building something that wasn't tainted by their shadow. And yet, as my success grew, so did their desperation. Mom started leaving voicemails, first gentle, then pleading. "Craig, please call your father. He's worried about you. Worried about me." The irony made me laugh. Then Jason texted me out of nowhere. "We should talk. Things are getting messy here." I ignored it. 2 days later, I got an email from one of Dad's old business rivals, a man named Leonard Price. He congratulated me on NodeTrack and attached a short note. "I've heard what your family tried to do. If you ever need leverage, let's just say I have a few old skeletons from your father's closet that might interest you." I didn't respond to that either, but I saved the email. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because it was proof that the tide had turned. For the first time, people weren't looking at me as the disappointment. They were looking at me as the wild card, the one who broke free. I even started getting invitations, tech conferences, speaking events, interviews. I declined most, but eventually I said yes to one. A private leadership summit hosted at the same country club where my family's Thanksgiving dinner had taken place. The irony was poetic. When I walked into that room months later, I wasn't the outcast with the wrinkled blazer. I was the keynote speaker. They introduced me as Craig Lawson, founder of Circuitech and CEO of NodeTrack. I didn't correct them about the last name. Not yet. The speech went perfectly. I talked about resilience, innovation, and what it means to build something when no one believes in you. But halfway through, I caught movement near the back, a familiar face. Jason, standing by the door, arms folded, pretending to be casual. Our eyes met for a second. He smiled, that same fake, confident smile I'd grown up with. But there was something different this time. It wasn't arrogance. It was discomfort. After the speech, he cornered me near the bar. "Didn't know you'd be here," he said, trying to sound light. "Guess you didn't check the guest list." He laughed awkwardly. "You've been busy. NodeTrack's all over the news. Impressive stuff." I didn't reply. He shifted, his tone softening. "Look, things at Dad's firm, they're not great. He's under investigation. Some client losses. A few bad trades. He's not handling it well." I sipped my drink. "That's unfortunate." Jason's jaw tightened. "Come on, man. You don't have to act like this. We're family, are we?" He exhaled, frustrated. "You can't seriously hold a grudge forever. You won. Isn't that enough?" I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You still think this was about winning?" He didn't answer. That night, I drove home in silence, city lights streaking past the windshield. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated, even. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. They hadn't learned anything. They hadn't apologized. They hadn't even acknowledged what they did. Still, life was finally stable. NodeTrack was booming, my reputation restored, and the acquisition funds safely under my control. The same people who once ignored me now wanted to partner with me. My name was quietly building weight in circles my father could never reach. And yet, there was still a part of me, that quiet, buried part, that wanted closure. Not revenge, just truth, laid bare. That chance came a month later, when I received a call from a journalist who'd been investigating Lawson Financial for months. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "you might want to see something before it goes public." She sent me a file, dozens of internal documents, recordings, emails. It was everything. Illegal transfers, fake partnerships, manipulation of client funds. all of it pointing to my father's firm and Jason's involvement. I scrolled through the evidence, my heart pounding. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just holding proof of their betrayal. I was holding power, and I knew exactly how to use it. But before I did, I wanted to see just how far they'd fall on their own. So I waited silently as the walls began to close in on the Lawson empire. It started with whispers, then audits, then, finally, something that even my father couldn't buy his way out of, a federal investigation. When the investigation into Lawson Financial became public, I didn't have to lift a finger. News outlets that once ignored me were now plastering headlines across every feed. Lawson Financial under federal scrutiny for fraudulent activity. It was almost poetic. The same machine that had once chewed up my name was now turning on my father's empire. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I'd learned to wait, to let people show how desperate they could get before the final push. Within a week, Jason called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Craig, his voice cracked slightly. You've seen the news. I have. He exhaled shakily. They're saying doctored documents. That we falsified financials. You know that's not true. Oh, I do, I said calmly. I know exactly who falsified documents. There was silence, then a nervous laugh. Okay, look, I made mistakes, but I didn't do that. It was Dad's idea. He said we had to protect the family name. I was just following orders. Jason always reverted to that, the obedient son defense. Convenient when things got messy. I can't help you, I said. You made your choices. Craig, please, he said, desperation bleeding into his tone. They're coming for me now. I need you to talk to your contacts, the tech press, the auditors. Tell them I had nothing to do with it. I stared out my window, city lights glinting like cold stars against the skyline. You didn't have a problem using my name when it suited you, I said quietly. Now you want me to clean yours? Come on, man. You're not really gonna just watch me go down. I'm not watching, I said. I'm remembering. I hung up, but I wasn't done. His panic gave me something I'd been waiting for, timing. If Jason was breaking, that meant Dad was cornered. And when men like my father feel cornered, they start making sloppy moves. Through Tomas, I learned the investigation had traced one of the shell company accounts to an offshore fund in Dad's name. The same one he'd used years ago to hide money during a market scandal. That account, Tomas discovered, was still active. Worse, it had recent transactions, including payments to the consultant who forged my documents. It was the missing piece. I met Tomas in a dim cafe that night. He slid a flash drive across the table. Everything you need. Transaction history, transfer records, timestamps. They tried to erase them, but I found backups. I picked it up carefully. This could ruin him. Tomas smirked. That's the point, right? But I didn't want just ruin. I wanted revelation, a moment they couldn't talk their way out of, where every mask fell off in front of witnesses who mattered. And Thanksgiving was coming again. Mom sent the usual group message. Family dinner, same place, 6 p.m. Let's put the past behind us. I almost deleted it. Then I realized it was the perfect stage. When the night came, I arrived early. Same country club, same polished silverware, same warm lighting. The last time I'd walked in here, I was the disappointment. This time, I was the storm they didn't see coming. They arrived one by one. Mom first, dressed like she was attending a photo shoot. Then Jason, pale and tense. And finally Dad, looking worn down, though still trying to project authority. He greeted me with forced warmth. Craig, glad you came. I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. We made small talk. It was brittle. Every word felt like it might shatter. Halfway through dinner, Jason finally snapped. Are you happy now? He asked, voice tight. You got what you wanted. The company's collapsing. Dad's reputation is shot. My career's done. I set my fork down. You did that yourselves. Dad's tone sharpened. Don't take that tone with your brother. He's paid enough for your grudge. My grudge. I said softly. You framed me. You stole from me. You tried to bury me. And now you want pity. He leaned forward, eyes cold. You're still bitter. You think success makes you righteous? You wouldn't even have that success if it weren't for this family. I smiled slightly. Funny. I used to believe that too. Then I pulled out my phone, opened a file, and slid it across the table. It was Tomas's compilation, time-stamped bank records, emails, offshore transfers, everything. Dad's expression froze. Jason leaned in and went white. Mom just whispered, "What is this?" Proof, I said simply. Every transfer, every forgery, every payment tied to your consultant. It's all there. You didn't just break the law. You tried to drag my name through it too. Dad's hand trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it by folding his napkin. You think this will help you? You're as much a Lawson as we are. If this comes out, your name's in it too. I leaned back. No, Craig Lawson is done. Everything I own now, my company, my assets, they're under Laro Group. Clean, independent, untouchable. You taught me to cover my tracks. I just learned better. Jason looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. You planned this, he whispered. For a while, I said. You wanted control. You wanted the family name to mean something again. Well, now it will. Dad glared at me, fury barely contained. You wouldn't dare expose your own father. I looked him dead in the eye. You stopped being my father when you tried to destroy me. For a long time, no one said anything. The only sound was the soft hum of the dining room and the distant clink of glass. Then I stood. You should probably call your lawyer, I said. Because tomorrow morning, this goes to the investigators. All of it. Mom grabbed my arm. Craig, please. Don't do this. You'll ruin us. I paused. You ruined me first. Then I walked out. The next morning, I didn't send the file. Not to the authorities, not yet. I sent it to the journalist who'd contacted me months earlier. She'd been waiting for a follow-up, and I gave her everything. Within 48 hours, the story broke. New evidence links Lawson Financial to international fraud ring. Sources suggest internal whistleblower. The photos were everywhere. Dad leaving his office surrounded by reporters, Jason shielding his face from cameras, Mom looking lost in the background. By the end of the week, federal agents raided Lawson Financial's headquarters. Accounts were frozen, assets seized. Jason was named as a cooperating witness, which told me he'd turned on Dad the second things got bad. Typical. I didn't make any public statement. I didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than I ever could. But the best part came later that month, when the same news channel that had once broadcast my company's acquisition now ran a special segment on the fall of Lawson Financial. The reporter ended with a line that almost made me laugh. Ironically, the family's estranged son, tech entrepreneur Craig Lawson, appears to be the only member who emerged unscathed and more successful than ever. I turned off the TV, sat back in silence, and let that sentence settle. They'd spent years calling me the disappointment. Now, I was the only thing left standing with the Lawson name, and the world finally knew why. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't done yet. Because I'd just received a letter, not from a lawyer, not from a journalist, but from someone I hadn't expected to hear from again. A letter that would change what I planned to do next. The letter came on a gray December morning, slipped under my apartment door without a return address. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful but trembling. I recognized it immediately, my mother's. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away. But curiosity won. Inside was a single page. Her words were short, uneven. Craig, your father's been charged. They came to the house last night. Jason gave them everything to save himself. He's under investigation too. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that we never stopped loving you. We just didn't understand you. And now it's too late. I hope you find peace. Please don't come here. It's better if you remember us the way we were before all of this. Love, Mom. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. There was no satisfaction in it, not the kind you see in movies. Just quiet. Heavy, final quiet. A few days later, the verdicts began rolling in. My father's empire collapsed publicly and painfully. He was found guilty of fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The same financial press that had once worshipped him now picked apart every lie he'd built. Reporters described how he'd used his firm to manipulate markets and cover illegal transfers, and how the cover-up began when he tried to protect his family's image. Jason wasn't spared either. He struck a deal to avoid prison, but his career was finished. Every major financial institution cut ties with him. He moved out of his downtown condo, his name scrubbed from company registries, his once lavish life reduced to a series of apologies no one cared to hear. Mom disappeared from the public eye. She sold the family home quietly and moved out of state. I didn't hear from her again, though sometimes I caught myself wondering if she'd ever found peace. As for me, the irony was, I didn't have to lift a single finger once the truth came out. Everything they'd used against me became their undoing. The documents they forged, the lies they spread, the arrogance that made them believe they could control everything. It all came back around, perfectly, almost poetically. The night my father's sentencing aired on the news, I sat alone in my office, the city glowing beneath the window. The reporter's voice droned softly in the background. Former financial executive Harold Lawson sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His son Jason Lawson has entered a plea agreement and is cooperating with investigators. I muted the TV. For the first time in my life, there was no anger left. No noise. Just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop needing approval from the people who never wanted you to succeed. I walked to the window and looked out over the skyline. The same city where they'd once laughed at me, where I'd been the family disappointment. Down below, the headquarters of my company glowed with the logo I'd built from scratch. No track. My name wasn't even on the building, and I liked it that way. Because I didn't need anyone to know who I was anymore. The people who mattered already did. A few weeks later, I visited the country club one last time. Not for dinner, not for nostalgia, just to see it in daylight. The place was almost empty, the same room where Jason once raised a glass and said, "Maybe someday you'll catch up." I sat at the same table, ordered a drink, and smiled to myself. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. "No," I said, "just remembering something." I stayed for a while, then left the check on the table with a note scribbled on the back. Nothing poetic, nothing cruel. Just one line. Guess I finally caught up. And as I walked out into the winter air, I realized something I never had before. Revenge wasn't about watching them fall. It was about finally standing tall without needing them to see it. That was the real victory. That was the end of being the disappointment. My name's Ryan. I'm 26, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had this uncanny ability to turn even the simplest situations into a test of loyalty, and I've never passed in their eyes. It's like they keep a mental scoreboard of every time I've failed to measure up, whether that's not eating enough at a family dinner, showing up 5 minutes late to a barbecue, or refusing to laugh at one of my dad's digs at me. If I push back even slightly, I'm told I'm too sensitive or trying to make myself the victim. That's just the environment I grew up in. Sarcasm and judgment disguised as family bonding. It had always been little moments, the kind you could almost brush off if you wanted to keep the peace. My dad, Mark, is the kind of man who thinks admitting weakness is a sin. His favorite phrases are "walk it off" and "stop making excuses." My Aunt Laura, his older sister, is cut from the same cloth, except she wraps her criticism in fake concern. She'll ask if I'm feeling okay, then follow it up with, "You've always been a bit fragile, haven't you?" My mom stays mostly quiet, though every so often she'll chime in just enough to keep herself from looking like she's not part of the group. And then there's my cousin Tyler, Aunt Laura's golden child. He's 30, still lives at home, and somehow never lifts a finger to help at gatherings. Yet he's constantly praised for being such a hard worker. I learned early on that family events weren't about enjoying each other's company. They were about proving yourself worthy of belonging. So I played along when I was younger. I smiled, helped with chores, tried to keep my head down. But no matter how much I pitched in, it always seemed like I was the first one to be criticized if something wasn't done right. My dad would find a way to twist it, and Aunt Laura would nod along, eyes sharp like she was taking notes for later. The day it happened, I'd already been dreading the family cookout. It was at my parents' house, which meant I couldn't exactly make an excuse to skip without causing a storm. The plan was the same as always: eat, chat, then clean up for hours while my dad and Tyler lounged in the living room watching TV. I told myself I'd just get through it quietly. I showed up on time, brought dessert, and even offered to help my mom set up before anyone else arrived. She accepted, but I could tell from her tone she thought it was the least I could do. By the time everyone was there, the air felt heavy, partly from the summer heat, partly from the usual tension. Conversations were light on the surface, but I caught the sideways glances when I didn't laugh at Tyler's jokes about me still being single. I kept busy, running back and forth between the kitchen and the yard, carrying trays of food, refilling drinks. The heat started getting to me at some point, and I felt this strange tightness in my chest. It wasn't like anything I'd felt before, a mix of pressure and dizziness. I tried to ignore it, figuring I just needed to sit for a minute. But when I finally leaned against the counter, my dad's voice cut through the background noise. "Quit faking it," he snapped from across the kitchen, eyes narrowing like I'd just committed a crime. We still have dishes piled up in the sink. You're not getting out of helping. I opened my mouth to say something, to explain that I really didn't feel well, but before I could, Aunt Laura chimed in from the dining table. Oh, please, Ryan. You've been pulling this act since you were a kid. The old, I'm not feeling well trick to get out of cleaning. He's just tired from standing, Mark. Don't coddle him. Her words stung in that familiar way, like a slap wrapped in velvet. But before I could even think about defending myself, another wave of dizziness hit me. My vision blurred slightly, and I had to steady myself against the counter. My breathing felt shallow, each inhale shorter than the last. I could hear my pulse in my ears, fast and uneven, and a cold sweat started forming at the back of my neck. I just need. My voice sounded weak, even to me. I tried to take a deeper breath, but it felt like my chest was locked in place. Oh, for crying out loud, my dad muttered. Fine, sit down for a second. But don't think this means you're done helping. His words were sharp, almost impatient, like I'd just inconvenienced him. I tried to walk toward a chair, but halfway there, my legs buckled. I caught myself against the wall, and that's when my cousin Tyler looked up from his phone. Man, you're being dramatic, he said with a smirk. You should have been in theater. I wanted to shout at them, to make them see that this wasn't some performance, but my breaths were coming faster now, shallow and panicked. My chest burned. My hands tingled. I could feel the edges of panic closing in, though it wasn't the kind you could think your way out of. It was physical, involuntary. That's when my mom, finally, stood up and said, Mark, maybe we should. But she didn't finish. Someone had already called for an ambulance. I didn't even see who. All I knew was that moments later, a paramedic was in front of me, crouched low to meet my eyes. Sir, can you hear me? How long have you been having trouble breathing? I tried to answer, but it came out as a strained gasp. He pressed 2 fingers to my neck, checking my pulse, and his expression changed instantly. We need a stretcher now, he shouted toward the door. The shift in the room was immediate. Chairs scraped. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Aunt Laura's face went pale, and my dad froze like someone had hit pause on him. The noise of the party died, replaced by the quick, purposeful movements of the EMTs. And in that sudden, suffocating silence, every single one of them realized at the same time that something was seriously wrong. But instead of that instant outpouring of concern you'd expect from family, there was this awkward hesitation, like they didn't quite know how to act now that their lazy, dramatic narrative about me didn't fit. My dad stood there with his arms crossed, watching the EMTs wheel the stretcher in, as if waiting for them to declare it was all in my head. Aunt Laura had that tight, polite smile plastered on, the one she uses when she's pretending she didn't just insult someone. They got me onto the stretcher and started moving me toward the front door. I could hear snippets of their conversation behind me, low, hushed tones, but I caught enough to piece together the gist. Aunt Laura said something like, well, you know Ryan. He probably just worked himself up. He's always been a bit theatrical. My dad mumbled something in agreement. Even now, as I was being taken to an ambulance, they were still clinging to the idea that I was faking. The ride to the hospital felt like it lasted both 2 minutes and 2 hours. My mind kept bouncing between the rising panic of what was happening to my body and this deep, hollow ache from knowing my own family had written me off so quickly. The EMT kept talking to me, telling me to focus on breathing as best I could, that they were getting oxygen ready. His voice was calm and steady, a lifeline I clung to. When I finally stabilized in the ER after tests and treatments, I was exhausted in a way I'd never felt before. Physically, mentally, emotionally. The doctor came in, serious but kind, and explained what had happened. I'd experienced a severe allergic reaction, likely from something I'd eaten at the cookout. My airway had started to constrict, my blood pressure had dropped, and if the ambulance had been delayed by even 10 minutes, things could have turned out very differently. It was a lot to take in, but before I could even process it, I noticed my dad leaning in the doorway of my hospital room. Aunt Laura was behind him. Holding a coffee cup like this was just another casual visit. Tyler wasn't there. Apparently, he'd gone home because there was nothing more he could do. My mom was off in the corner, pretending to scroll on her phone, though I could see the worry in her eyes. You good? My dad asked, in the same tone you'd ask someone if they were done borrowing your lawnmower. The doctor gave him a sharp look, then repeated, almost word for word, that this was a life-threatening reaction and that I needed to take precautions from now on. He even told them the exact symptoms I'd been having, the ones they'd brushed off as laziness or dramatics. My dad nodded like he understood, but then said, "So, what? He's allergic to barbecues now." Aunt Laura laughed softly, like it was a harmless joke, and added, "We've all had food not agree with us before. You just push through." The doctor didn't laugh. He looked between them and me, clearly picking up on the dynamic, and said, "No, this isn't about pushing through. He could have died." His voice was firm enough to silence the room for a few seconds, but I knew my dad. That kind of silence wasn't acceptance, it was annoyance. I stayed in the hospital overnight for observation. My mom left early, saying she needed to get the house cleaned up after the party. Aunt Laura and my dad didn't come back the next morning. The only reason I got home was because a nurse arranged for a volunteer driver to take me. My own family didn't even bother to pick me up. When I walked into my apartment later that day, still feeling weak, there was already a text from my dad waiting for me. "Glad you're feeling better. Don't forget we've got the family reunion in 2 weeks." No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just an expectation that I'd show up again, ready to play my role as the one they could mock or ignore until it was time to clean up. I tried to let it go, at least for a few days, telling myself maybe they were just uncomfortable with emotions and didn't know how to handle what happened. But then the stories started spreading. I heard from a cousin that Aunt Laura had been telling people I'd overreacted and caused a scene at the cookout, making everyone uncomfortable. She even claimed the EMTs didn't seem that concerned, and that the hospital kept me overnight just to be safe, not because it was serious. That was the moment the slow burn started in my chest. Not the tightness from before, but something sharper. Anger. The kind that doesn't flare up and fade, but simmers, gaining heat over time. I could have let it slide if they'd just been dismissive. That was normal. But rewriting the story to make me look bad? That was something else entirely. And when the next family event rolled around, the favoritism and quiet jabs were worse than ever. I didn't want to go to the reunion, but I also knew if I skipped it, they'd twist that into proof I was still sulking or trying to make everything about me. So, 2 weeks later, I showed up, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to see for myself how far they'd push this narrative. It was being held at Aunt Laura's place this year, a big suburban house with a yard that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. The kind of place where appearances mattered more than anything. When I arrived, she greeted me with that overbright, hostess smile. "Ryan, feeling better? You look fine now. Guess it wasn't as bad as they made it sound, huh?" She said it loud enough for the small cluster of relatives nearby to hear. I caught the little chuckles and side eyes. Inside, the dining table was already set with food. I scanned the spread and immediately noticed there were no labels on anything. After what happened last time, I was hyper-aware of what I ate. The doctor had told me to be cautious, avoid certain ingredients until I could get tested further. I asked Aunt Laura, quietly, if she could tell me what was in a few dishes just so I could avoid another ER visit. She waved her hand. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's all homemade. It's fine. You're not going to have another one of your episodes." I bit my tongue and decided I'd just stick to the plain rolls and salad. But even that didn't go unnoticed. Tyler, already holding a plate stacked high with meat, pointed at me and said, "Still milking that barbecue thing, huh? You should just get over it." A few people laughed. My dad, sitting nearby, smirked instead of shutting him down. For the first hour, I kept to myself, eating quietly and making small talk with the few relatives who weren't openly mocking me. But as the afternoon went on, the mood shifted in a way I didn't see coming. Someone announced that it was game time, and they started setting up this trivia challenge they do every year. It's harmless, usually, except this time, I noticed something strange when I saw the prize on the counter, an envelope with my name written on it. I frowned and asked Aunt Laura about it, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence. She smiled slyly. "Oh, that? It's a little surprise. You'll see." When it was my turn to play, she made a point of calling everyone into the living room. "All right, everyone, this round is special. We've got a Guess the Lie game, starring Ryan." I froze in place as she continued. "We're going to read 3 stories about him. 2 are true, 1's made up, and you all have to guess which one's the fake." I wanted to object, but they'd already started. The first story was about how I once spilled a drink on my cousin at a wedding and blamed the bartender. True, but I was 15 and it was an accident. The second was about me pretending to be sick at last year's reunion to avoid helping clean, completely false. And the third was about the cookout 2 weeks ago. Only, in their version, I pretended I couldn't breathe so I could get out of cleaning dishes, and the EMTs supposedly told me it was probably just nerves. They even added that I looked totally fine when I left in the ambulance. Everyone laughed. They were laughing at the thing that almost killed me. I could feel my hands trembling, heat crawling up my neck. My dad was in the corner, grinning. My mom sat stiffly but said nothing. Then Aunt Laura picked up the envelope. Here's the fun part. If you guess the right one, you get this $50 gift card. If no one guesses, Ryan gets it. The guesses started flying. Some people thought the cookout story was fake. Others guessed the reunion one. But in the end, enough people guessed correctly, meaning they all decided the cookout story was true, and Aunt Laura handed the envelope to Tyler. Tyler tore it open, and I caught a glimpse inside before he could hide it away. It wasn't $50. It was a voucher for a barbecue restaurant. I don't think I've ever felt my stomach drop so fast. This wasn't just mocking anymore. This wasn't just favoritism. This was deliberate, targeted cruelty. They'd turned my allergic reaction into a family joke, complete with a prize, and made sure the person who'd mocked me the most got to wave it in my face. I left early that day without saying goodbye, but something inside me shifted on the drive home. The trust, whatever sliver of it I'd been holding on to, was gone. This wasn't about misunderstanding or generational differences anymore. This was about control, humiliation, and making sure I stayed in the role they'd assigned me. And that was the day I started planning exactly how I was going to take that role apart, piece by piece. The drive home from that reunion felt longer than any road I'd ever taken. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, looping over every laugh, every smirk, every sideways glance I'd just endured. The barbecue voucher image kept flashing in my head like a neon sign. I could hear Tyler's smug voice, Aunt Laura's gleeful tone, my dad's silent approval. When I got back to my apartment, I shut the door and stood in the dark for a few minutes. Normally, I'd throw on the TV or scroll my phone to distract myself, but this time, there was no distraction big enough. It all just sat there, heavy. I realized, for maybe the first time, that I was utterly alone in this. I didn't just have an unsupportive family. I had a family who saw me as entertainment, as someone they could publicly ridicule for sport. The days after were quiet, but in a hollow kind of way. I went to work, came home, ate whatever I could throw together, and barely spoke to anyone. I wasn't even angry in the explosive sense anymore. I felt drained, almost numb, like they'd finally succeeded in squeezing all the energy out of me. Even the thought of confronting them seemed pointless. What would I say? Please don't mock the thing that almost killed me. They'd twisted into me being sensitive again. I started dodging their calls. Aunt Laura left a voicemail about needing me to bring dessert for Tyler's birthday. My dad texted me a reminder about a family work day to help out at his house. I ignored both. I knew it would cause ripples, but for the first time, I didn't care about the ripples. I cared about getting through each day without feeling like my chest was caving in. But even as I withdrew, I couldn't stop replaying certain moments. The way the EMT's voice had changed when he checked my pulse. The doctor's firm tone when he told my family I could have died. The fact that not a single one of them, not my dad, not Aunt Laura, not Tyler, took that seriously. It was a strange combination of feelings. Shame for letting them treat me this way for so long, and something sharper underneath, the beginnings of resolve. The turning point came a week later when I got my allergy test results back. I was allergic to a specific ingredient that had been in one of Aunt Laura's homemade sauces. Severe enough that the doctor stressed I should always carry an EpiPen, avoid anything with even trace amounts, and be prepared to seek emergency help immediately if I reacted again. He gave me a written report detailing the reaction, how dangerous it had been, and how lucky I'd been to get help in time. Holding that paper in my hands, I felt a shift. This wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. This was documented, indisputable fact. And they had mocked it. Not in private, not in some heat-of-the-moment remark, but in front of the entire family, with a prize for the best punchline. I didn't share the results with them. Not yet. Instead, I tucked the report away in a drawer and started making small changes. I cut down even further on contact. I kept my social media quiet. I started tracking every incident in a private document, every message, every comment, every little jab. At first, it was just a way to get it out of my head. But the more I wrote, the more I started to see patterns and possibilities. Meanwhile, the silence didn't go unnoticed. I heard from a cousin that Aunt Laura had been telling people I was pouting and isolating myself to make them feel guilty. Tyler apparently thought it was hilarious and said I'd probably show up at Christmas with a medical alert bracelet just for attention. My dad, he told people he was giving me space to cool off, as if he was the reasonable one in all this. It should have hurt, but instead, it clarified something for me. These people weren't going to change. They weren't going to apologize. And if I kept showing up, they were going to keep feeding off whatever reaction they could squeeze out of me. The only way to shift anything was to stop playing the role entirely, but not before making sure they felt the consequences of how they'd treated me. I didn't know exactly what form that would take yet. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I was done reacting on their terms. And when the perfect opportunity finally presented itself, I was ready. It's funny how quickly life can start to feel different once you stop pouring your energy into people who only drain it. After that day, I tucked away my allergy report. Things slowly started shifting. Without the constant undercurrent of family drama dragging me under, I suddenly had time, and more importantly, mental space, to focus on myself. I poured it into work first. I'd been at my job for years, coasting under the radar, always doing enough to be reliable, but never pushing for more. Now, I threw myself into projects, stayed late, volunteered for assignments no one else wanted. It wasn't about proving anything to my family anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could take up space in the world without their permission. By the end of the quarter, my manager called me in and told me I'd been nominated for a promotion. It came with a significant pay raise, but what hit me harder was the way she said, "You've really stepped up lately." I walked out of that meeting feeling taller than I had in years. Outside of work, I started making small investments in my own happiness. I signed up for a cooking class, partly because I wanted to learn how to make food I knew was safe for me, but also because I enjoyed it. I joined a gym, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it felt good to feel stronger. I even started reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted away from, people who actually cared how I was doing and didn't treat my existence like a running joke. The more I built this separate life, the less their noise mattered. Aunt Laura's digs didn't sting when I heard about them secondhand. Tyler's smugness seemed almost pathetic in comparison to the small, steady wins I was racking up. My dad's dismissive tone in the few texts we exchanged read more like a desperate attempt to keep me on the hook than anything resembling authority. And then something unexpected happened. My cooking instructor, who was also a local event coordinator, asked if I'd be interested in volunteering at a food festival in the city. It was a big deal, a mix of restaurants, culinary schools, and local talent. I said yes without thinking too hard about it, and it ended up being one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Over that weekend, I met people from all over, chefs, business owners, vendors. I found myself in conversations I'd never have imagined a year ago, and one of those conversations turned into an opportunity to collaborate on a small project for a catering company. It was paid, flexible, and something I could do alongside my main job. By the time it wrapped up, they asked if I'd be open to more freelance work. Suddenly, I wasn't just doing well at my job. I had a growing side income doing something I enjoyed. I started putting that money into savings, quietly building a financial cushion. And with each month that passed, I felt less and less tied to the version of me they'd always known. The one who was always struggling or too sensitive or not pulling his weight. Of course, my family noticed the distance. They noticed even more when I started politely declining invitations to smaller gatherings. My reasons were simple. Can't make it this time. I have plans. Not excuses. Not justifications. Just boundaries. And that's when the texts started shifting in tone. My dad's short reminders about events turned into, "Haven't seen you in a while. Everyone's wondering what you've been up to." Aunt Laura's passive-aggressive comments became more pointed. "Hope you're not letting that little incident keep you away from the family." Tyler didn't reach out at all, but I knew from a cousin that he'd been telling people I thought I was too good for them now. They were curious. They were unsettled. And, for the first time in my life, I had something they didn't: control. I knew things they didn't know. I was building a life they hadn't touched, one that was starting to outshine the one they thought they'd defined for me. I wasn't ready to make a move just yet. But the next big family event was coming up, the kind of gathering where everyone would be there. And I had an idea forming in the back of my mind. Because now, I had the resources, the proof, and the confidence to flip the script completely. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. It was my mom who first mentioned it. In one of her rare, short calls where she kept her voice neutral, almost like she didn't want my dad or Aunt Laura overhearing. You know your dad's turning 60 this year, right? Laura's planning a big surprise party. Everyone's coming. She hesitated before adding, it's supposed to be formal. She's really going all out. I could practically see it in my head. Aunt Laura using the event to cement her image as the perfect hostess. Tyler strutting around like he was the co-host. My dad basking in the attention. And me? I'd be expected to quietly show up, contribute in some way, and endure whatever jokes they decided to toss my way that night. Only this time, I wasn't going to be the one caught off guard. The first piece of useful information fell into my lap a few days later. A catering contact from the food festival, someone I'd kept in touch with, posted on social media about booking a huge private party on the same date my mom had mentioned. The location? A high-end event hall in town. It didn't take much to confirm it was the same one Aunt Laura had chosen for my dad's party. Not only did I now know where it would be, I also knew who was catering it, and I had a direct line to them. That's when an idea began to crystallize. I didn't have the full plan yet, but I could already see ways to control the narrative for once. Ways to make the night unfold on my terms. My allergy report was still tucked away in my desk drawer, untouched since the day I got it. But the thought of it started to feel less like a medical document and more like a loaded weapon. Not in a malicious way, but in a way that could force the truth into the open without me ever raising my voice. Meanwhile, I kept playing my part. I replied to my dad's occasional texts with short but polite answers. When Aunt Laura sent out the official group message inviting me to the party, with a note that the dress code was black tie, no exceptions, I responded with a simple, looking forward to it. No sarcasm, no hint of my real intentions. Then something else fell into place. The catering company needed extra hands for a smaller event the week before the party, and they reached out to see if I'd be available. I said yes, knowing it would give me a perfect reason to chat casually with the head chef and some of the staff who'd be working my dad's event. I learned small but telling details. The exact menu, the setup schedule, even how Aunt Laura had insisted on surprise speeches after dinner. That last bit was gold. It meant there would be a moment in the evening when the entire room's attention would be focused on the front, a moment where anything said would be impossible to ignore. I didn't tip my hand to anyone. I just kept collecting information, making quiet calls, and mapping out how to use the night to my advantage. And as each piece of the puzzle slid into place, the anticipation started building. For years, they dictated the setting, the tone, and the story. But now, I had the location, the timing, and the perfect leverage to make sure the truth came out, in front of every single person who'd laughed at my expense. And best of all, they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late to stop it. The night of my dad's 60th arrived crisp and cool, the kind of evening that made the city lights feel sharper. I showed up at the event hall right on time, dressed to the nines in a black suit that actually fit, a small detail, but one I knew would quietly throw off a few relatives who were used to making jokes about my off-the-rack clothes. I walked in with calm confidence, the kind you only have when you know exactly what's going to happen and exactly when. The hall was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, neatly set round tables, and a buffet that looked like it belonged in a food magazine. I caught sight of the catering team I'd worked with before, and they gave me a subtle nod. We'd already spoken in advance. They knew about my allergy and had taken the extra step of making every single dish labeled clearly. That alone would have been enough to make Aunt Laura grit her teeth, but it was only the opening move. The first hour went as expected. People mingled, clinked glasses, made small talk. Aunt Laura made her grand rounds, introducing herself to anyone who hadn't already been subjected to her syrupy charm. Tyler was at the bar, holding court with a cluster of cousins, clearly enjoying the spotlight. My dad was in his element, greeting guests with booming laughter. I played along. I smiled, shook hands, and let them think I'd shown up just to be a good sport. And when dinner was served, I made a deliberate point of filling my plate, not just with the safe options, but with a little bit of everything. Every dish had a label, right down to the sauce ingredients. I could feel Aunt Laura watching me from across the room, her expression flickering with the smallest trace of irritation that her old, "don't be dramatic" trick wasn't going to work tonight. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the speeches. The lights dimmed slightly, the mic was set up, and Aunt Laura, naturally, took the stage first. She gave a long, self-congratulatory toast about how much work went into planning the party, how wonderful it was to have the whole family together, and how at the end of the day, family is about laughter and not taking ourselves too seriously. I knew exactly what she was alluding to. She passed the mic to Tyler, who gave a short, rambling speech mostly about himself, but ended it with a joke about making sure Ryan stays away from the barbecue table this time. A few polite laughs echoed through the room. My dad chuckled. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, letting the quiet build, and walked toward the stage. Aunt Laura handed me the mic with a forced smile. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to speak, but she also wasn't going to cause a scene by refusing. I started simply. I wasn't going to say anything tonight, I said, my voice even, steady. But since this is a celebration of family, I think it's the perfect time to clear something up. 2 months ago, at the cookout, I had what the doctor later confirmed was a severe allergic reaction. My airway started to close. My blood pressure dropped. If the ambulance had been 10 minutes later, I might not be standing here tonight. The room went quiet. No shifting chairs. No clinking glasses. Just stillness. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded paper, the allergy report, complete with the doctor's notes. This is the medical documentation. Every symptom. Every detail. I keep it with me now, just in case. And I want everyone here to know that in the middle of that reaction, my own family accused me of faking it. They laughed about it. They turned it into a game. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see heads turning toward Aunt Laura and my dad. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, I continued. I'm telling you because for years, I've been the butt of the joke. And I let it slide because I thought keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But this, I tapped the paper lightly. This is the line. I'm done playing that role. I handed the paper to the cousin sitting closest to the stage. Pass it around if you want. It's not my word against anyone's. It's the truth in black and white. Then, without raising my voice or adding anything dramatic, I set the mic back on the stand and walked off stage. I didn't look at Aunt Laura or Tyler or my dad. I just returned to my seat, picked up my glass of water, and took a sip while the silence hung heavy over the room. That silence was worth every second of planning. But it was the reaction that came next, slow, subtle, and then suddenly sharp. That told me the night was far from over. It started with whispers, soft at first, like people were trying to process what they'd just heard. Then the murmurs grew into clusters of quiet conversations, heads leaning toward each other. I didn't have to listen closely to know the tone had shifted. The polite smiles were gone, replaced with uneasy glances toward the front of the room. Aunt Laura was frozen beside the podium, still holding her wine glass like she couldn't decide whether to take a sip or throw it. My dad's face was flushed, not with embarrassment, but with that stubborn, bristling defensiveness he always got when someone challenged him in public. Tyler, on the other hand, was grinning in disbelief, as if waiting for someone to jump in and save them from this awkwardness. Only no one did. Instead, an older cousin, one who'd been at that cookout and apparently hadn't realized the severity of what happened, walked up to me at the table. "Ryan, I didn't know it was like that. I'm sorry. That's not okay." He said it loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, and I caught the flicker of discomfort on my dad's face. Another aunt chimed in, agreeing. Then a few more voices joined, all at once. The social tide was turning right in front of them. Aunt Laura tried to recover, stepping forward with a laugh that sounded paper-thin. "Well, I think we can all agree Ryan's making a bigger deal out of this than necessary." "Laura," someone cut her off sharply from across the room. "He almost died. That's not a joke. That was it. The dam broke." People started questioning them outright. "Why didn't you take it seriously? Why turn it into a game? Did you really hand out a barbecue gift card after that?" The catering staff, who'd overheard enough while setting up, quietly confirmed the menu labels were something they decided to do after I told them my story. That alone made Aunt Laura's "it's fine" attitude look even worse. My dad stood, trying to quiet the room, but the more he spoke, the worse it got. His insistence that it was all in good fun only made the pushback louder. For the first time in my life, I watched them lose control of the narrative, not because I yelled or stormed out, but because their own behavior was finally being held up to the light, in front of the very audience they'd always performed for. The rest of the night was tense. Some relatives avoided them entirely, gravitating toward me instead. Others left early, clearly uncomfortable. The speeches were over, the easy laughter gone. As for me, I stayed until dessert, enjoying quiet conversations with people I'd barely spoken to at past gatherings. And when I finally got up to leave, I walked past Aunt Laura and my dad without a word. My dad muttered something under his breath, but I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. The last thing I saw before stepping out into the night was Aunt Laura standing alone at the empty podium, scanning the room like she was still trying to figure out how everything had flipped so fast. And for the first time in years, I realized they weren't laughing anymore.